A man stood before his friend's grave, lost in deep thought. Unable to forget what had happened in the small forest, the demonic figure with a baseball bat not only killed his friend but also enslaved numerous communities. Now, the days of humiliation were over, and the war of revenge was about to begin. To deal with this formidable enemy, Negan, Rick devised a meticulous plan. Step 1. They prepared numerous steel plates within the hilltop to create a fleet of war vehicles, ready to charge directly into the Savior's headquarters when the time was right. Step 2. They had to eliminate Negan's informants, and this required Dwight's help. Dwight wrote down the locations of various lookout points on pieces of paper and shot them out with a crossbow. Daryl was the one meeting up with Dwight.
But if it's the others...
The next step is to eliminate all the sentry points in the intelligence. The first one was in a tree by the highway, where people wouldn't even notice him. But today was the day the man died. The man died not knowing who shot him. With each lookout point eliminated, a mark was crossed off on the paper. Next was the second one. One of the Saviors was working diligently on sentry duty when two hands sneaked up on him from behind. Daryl walked out. This operation had to be done silently to prevent them from using their walkie-talkies. Next was the third one. It was a research facility, and the lookout was impaled from behind. The man of action is none other than Morgan. Morgan had abandoned his peaceful ways and was now determined to eradicate these demons. The fourth lookout was situated in a wooded area. The man was casually observing the bound zombies, but when he turned around, death awaited him. Rick's face is expressionless, and there's nothing but indifference in his eyes for these people at the Saviors. Although the man's death was inevitable, Rick paid him no attention and searched through a box for supplies. As the man neared death, he taunted Rick, reminding him of their encounter in the small forest where Rick had pleaded like a dog. The man believed that Rick's resistance against the Saviors was futile, and that even his son was doomed. Rick remained calm and simply crossed off the last lookout point on the paper. When Rick left, he cut the ropes binding the zombies. With this lookout point cleared, Rick signaled the Alexandria Safe Zone convoy, and they arrived shortly after. Half an hour later, on a vast plain, the caravans from Alexandria's Safe Zone, the Kingdom, and the Hilltop joined together. Almost all the fighting members of the three communities had come, and now they were gathering, getting to know each other, forming a force ready to fight for their freedom. The three leaders stood on the cars and delivered their pre-battle speeches. They were prepared, waiting for tomorrow's action. Of course, with their numbers, they couldn't completely wipe out the Saviors in one go. That's why Carol and Tara had been out luring zombies for the past few days. This massive horde of zombies was their gift to the Saviors. The next morning, the zombies had entered the Saviors' territory. Daryl and Morgan arrived at a crossroads, meeting up with Carol. Their mission today was to guide the zombies smoothly into the Saviors' stronghold. After they left, the cars exploded instantly. The towering flames and tremendous explosion sound attracted the zombies to advance. Inside the Savior's stronghold, the people heard the explosion and sent a small team to investigate. There was some speculation as to whether it could be a trap, but it was dismissed outright by Dwight, claiming that it could have been caused by a previous road bomb with a dud now accidentally touched by a zombie. Rick had anticipated the Savior's response, so he had placed a steel wire across the road, rigged to explode if any vehicle touched it. It'll lead the zombies in that direction. Just after the convoy left, Dwight lit a cigarette, but he didn't smoke it, he just looked around and put it out. It was a code word that Dwight and Rick had agreed on, signaling that it was time to strike. One modified car after another drove in, fitted with iron plates that could withstand bullets. As the convoy of modified cars from the three communities arrived at the Savior's doorstep, they assembled there within 3 minutes. Negan's informant was silently eliminated. Negan didn't know the Saviors were surrounded. Everyone was ready, and Maggie raised her hand. The reason why they shot into the air was because they agreed that Negan had to die, but they could give the others a chance to surrender. Soon after hearing the shots, Negan came out with his 5 deputies. Negan was slightly surprised to see the situation, but he didn't show any fear, as if the situation was always under his control. It's really hard to know if Negan is really confident or pretending to be calm. Negan then said in his strongest tone that he really didn't see the need for them to shoot each other, that he cared about his men and didn't want them to die on the battlefield. So Rick, what can I do for you?
Dwight. Your name's Simon.
Regina.
Rick, I'd feel remiss.
No. The Savior's inside. Y'all can live right now.
After Rick said that, they didn't think about surrendering. They didn't seem to believe that Rick and the others would be able to break through the place. Negan replied with confidence, asking if his people could surrender. Would Rick's small patrol let them go? Finding it a lucrative deal, is it possible that Negan has another plan? Soon, a sneaky figure emerged, and it was the Hilltop's leader, Gregory. Sure enough, Gregory runs to Negan, who brought him out for the purpose of having Gregory command the Hilltop members back.
They will no longer be welcomed. Their families will be thrown out and will be left to fend for themselves. Or you won't have a home to go back to. Go home now.
The members of the Hilltop looked at each other, and Maggie also allowed them to make their own choice.
All I have at the Hilltop are a bunch of books and an old lobster bit.
Doesn't look like anyone's going, does it?
Hilltop stands with...
The Hilltop stands with Maggie.
Simon was furious when he heard this. He was the one who took Gregory in. He thought Gregory would be able to order these people around, but he didn't realize that Gregory didn't have much authority at all in the Hilltop. Morgan sighed. The team sent to investigate the explosions appeared in the distance. Morgan hid quickly behind a pile of garbage bins. The car is getting closer and closer. There's no chance of surviving this kind of explosion. Seeing the smoke in the distance, Rick nodded to Maggie, knowing everything was going according to plan. However, they needed to act quickly as the zombie horde was also closing in. Negan finally realized the seriousness of the situation.
This is the only way. You lieutenants!
Maybe we could take a time out here.
No, this has to happen now. You're gonna have to make up your minds.
Negan is now blue in the face. Rick seemed to recall something and said with a playful tone, "There's something inexplicably familiar about that phrase."
9, 8, 7.
The gunshot rang out, and Negan's group quickly fled. Rick and his people never intended to launch a full-scale attack inside the Savior's compound, as it would come at a high cost. Instead, they directed their fire towards the house, leaving the Saviors with no place to hide and attracting the nearby horde of zombies. Morgan and his group heard the gunshots and realized that the war had begun. The zombies had also arrived at their location. Rick's strategy was unfolding flawlessly, one step after another. Next, Carol and the others would join Rick's group. Daryl rode his motorcycle, leading the zombies towards the Savior's compound. Upon hearing the second explosion, Rick knew the zombies had entered. Maggie sounded the car alarm, and they proceeded to break open the gate, allowing the zombies to flood in. Today, the RV that had been their companion for a long time was also about to be sacrificed. Daryl blasts the last 2 bombs and takes off down the side road in style, and the zombies will follow the sound. The explosion of the RV served as a direction guide for the zombies. Negan was dodging bullets. He never thought he'd see the day. Rick naturally saw Negan and kept shooting at him. Rick's eyes are only left with Negan. He can't hear anything outside. Luckily, Gabriel pulled Rick back and he came to his senses. The zombie horde has already arrived here. The most important thing is to get out of here and leave the rest to the zombies. Rick took a quick photo and drove off in his car. Gabriel got in his car and was about to leave when he heard Gregory calling for help. As a priest, Gabriel was capable of killing, but he couldn't help saving lives. He rushes out again. There were still people shooting at Gabriel upstairs. He hid behind a stone pier and reassured Gregory not to panic. Just wait for the right moment. Gregory nodded his thanks. As soon as he was finished, the saviors above started shooting again, causing Gregory to panic. Gregory then sees the car with the rattles and he has a sudden thought. Gabriel realized something was wrong and told Gregory not to do anything and to wait for his chance. But the old man doesn't listen to Gabriel. He's already scared out of his wits. This ungodly fellow got away with Gabriel's car. Gabriel doesn't have time to complain. The zombies have all come in. Now, the place is filled with zombies, and there is simply no way to escape. Finally, Gabriel ran into a trailer and escaped. Still breathing heavily, at that moment, a familiar voice came from behind him. It was Negan who was still alive, but the zombies have surrounded the area, and if no one comes to Negan's aid, he's dead for sure. Rick and the others can be said to have achieved the first step of victory, but the saviors have not yet been eliminated. Apart from the base camp, there are still many outposts and strongholds. We can't give the saviors a chance to catch their breath. Otherwise, when they come to rescue Negan, this operation will be meaningless. Gabriel didn't show up. They couldn't wait any longer. They had to take action immediately, because there are so many outposts. They're splitting up this time. Morgan, Tara, Jesus, and others formed a group. Daryl and Rick were in a group. The Kingdom as a group. The man was standing guard when a crossbow bolt pierced his skull. It's Daryl and Rick, and now they're going to take down every single one of the Savior's outposts. The two sneaked in through the back door, but the Saviors at the front door didn't notice, going about their business as usual, oblivious. This is the Savior's repair station, specializing in weapons preparation. The woman in charge, the leader here, felt uneasy all day. She tried to contact the guards at the back door using the radio, but received no response. She sensed that something was amiss. Suddenly, an armed convoy stormed in, unleashing a relentless barrage of gunfire at the Saviors. They were the members from Alexandria's safe zone, sent by Rick to draw the enemy's fire. Both sides were on the verge of a firefight. After losing a few members, the Saviors quickly regrouped and organized a counterattack. However, Rick had instructed his team not to engage in direct combat. They just needed to block the entrance. Meanwhile, the guards at the back door heard the gunshots but were ordered not to leave their post. Soon after, the two guards were silently taken out. Rick and Daryl, along with 3 others, made their way in. The corridor was eerily quiet, with no sign of the Saviors. It seemed they were all engaged in a battle with Aaron and the rest of the group in the front. Then they started to split up. They came in because Dwight had tipped them off to the presence of a Browning heavy machine gun. They must find the Browning machine gun and take it into their own hands, or Rick and his team will face disaster. The ongoing firefight outside continued, with Aaron's group taking cover behind metal panels and firing back. As per their plan, they only needed to keep the Saviors confined to the courtyard. The Saviors had no cover, and casualties began to mount on their side. Observing the situation, the woman thought these attackers were too timid to enter, so she ordered her people to break out and fight back. Meanwhile, Rick and Daryl had searched nearly half the rooms, but they still couldn't find the heavy machine gun. This weapon is so vital that if you get it, you can wipe out everyone in the Savior's base camp. They split up and intensified their efforts to finish the job quickly. A few minutes later, Rick was alone in a hallway, searching for clues. As he walked, Rick sensed some movement from a room on the right. Without hesitation, he opened the door to investigate. It seemed to be someone's living quarters, but there was no one inside the bedroom. Not taking any chances, Rick cautiously approached another door nearby. Just as he was about to open it, a man lunged at him, and they engaged in a fierce struggle. The man pinned Rick down and started raining blows on him. Fortunately, Rick managed to counter and free himself from the man's grip. Rick thought of drawing his gun to eliminate the threat, but the close quarters made it impractical. Rick was a police officer after all. His fighting skills were not comparable to those of ordinary people, and the man was a little confused after a few hits. Rick then seized the opportunity to restrain the man by the neck firmly. No matter how hard the man tried to break free, Rick held on.
Where are they? No guns. They're in there.
Rick was convinced that the man would fight to the death to prevent him from entering the room because it must hold something important. So, his only choice was to deal with the man first. Rick glanced at the hooks on the wall behind him and had a moment of hesitation, but he quickly dismissed the thought. This was no time for mercy. After subduing the man, Rick knelt on the floor, catching his breath. The intense fight had drained a considerable amount of his energy. Taking a moment to recover, Rick found a set of keys on the man and used them to open the door. Killing that man had stirred a feeling of guilt, as inside the room was not a cache of heavy weapons, but a child. It says Grace on it. Rick realized why the man fought so desperately to protect the room. He was a father guarding his child. Rick felt somewhat lost in thought, as if he had thought of his daughter Judith. If someone were to try to break in, he would also stop them at all costs. Overwhelmed with emotions, Rick felt a deep pang of sorrow and regret for not asking the man about Grace when he had the chance. Lost in contemplation, Rick fell silent. Was the person he saw in the mirror still the righteous police officer he once was? Meanwhile, Morgan, Tara, and Jesus arrived at another outpost. It was an external satellite station surrounded by a fence, and they knew that charging in recklessly would alert the zombies inside. So, Morgan came up with a plan. He quietly approached the fence and began tapping it with his hand, drawing the attention of the zombies in the vicinity. Slowly but steadily, more and more zombies gathered around. The two lookouts inside the outpost sensed that something was amiss.
Hey!
Here, come on, let's find them guns.
Having killed 2 men, they slipped in without incident. With silencers on their pistols, they killed 3 men in a row without being noticed. Jesus turned around and signaled that it was safe. The Hilltop's men came in with guns, having rehearsed this operation countless times. They moved with precision and efficiency. Morgan led the 2 newcomers to a door, where they could hear noises and see shadows moving inside. Although the Hilltop members had rehearsed their approach countless times, the newcomers were visibly trembling with nerves. Luckily, his comrades soothed his anxiety with. Morgan gave them a signal. As soon as the door opened, they would open fire and unleash a barrage of bullets. Meanwhile, Jesus and Tara were unaware of Morgan's team's situation as they approached another door where they heard movement inside. Prepared to kick the door open, they found a terrified man inside, who claimed he was not one of the saviors but had been forced to work there. Tara is suspicious and eager to eliminate this potential threat, but Jesus stops her, claiming that the man has surrendered and should not be killed. Tara insists it's a mission. Just as Jesus and Tara are arguing, gunshots are heard from Morgan's end. Using the opportunity to distract Tara, Jesus asked her to check on the situation, avoiding further arguments about the fate of the man. Reluctantly, Tara opened the door to see what was happening outside. Meanwhile, the gunfire continued from Morgan's team, suggesting that they had been exposed. That's when Jesus tells the men to come out. Tara was furious when she saw this and went up to deal with the man. The man pleaded with a pitiful expression, saying he was forced to come. Jesus felt sympathetic and wouldn't shoot a surrendered person, nor would he let Tara shoot. However, Tara didn't believe a word and pointed out that the saviors had taken all the prenatal vitamins that Maggie had been taking at the Hilltop. The saviors didn't care about anyone's life. Jesus is still trying to talk Tara down, and that's when...
You know what's funny? Normally I'd peg you as the softy, not pretty boy.
The man, however, took advantage of having a hostage and revealed his true nature. He's no longer weak or scared, and pissing his trousers is a deliberate attempt to lie today. The man even verbally abuses Maggie and deliberately breaks the bottle of prenatal vitamins she was taking at the top of the hill.
I may talk a big game, like
Jesus still couldn't bear to kill him, but knocked him out with the butt of his rifle and tied him up with a rope. Tara couldn't understand this. Just then, they heard the retreat order over the radio and rushed out to check. The saviors had indeed started to withdraw. Jesus immediately led a few people to intercept them outside. After the saviors left, there were only 3 bodies left on the ground. It wasn't until this moment that Morgan opened his eyes, and he saw the unwilling look in his teammates' eyes. At this moment, Morgan realized a lot. They had the initiative just now, but because they hesitated, the opposition killed them instead. Morgan glanced in the direction where the saviors had left and then sat up. Picking up his gun and following them, Morgan truly realizes that mercy will harm his teammates and that the enemy never hesitates. so this time he's going for the kill.
Sure we can do it. We've become all of us, yes. This group is done. We've learned what. I'm sure.
Outside, Jesus led the group, commanding everyone to block the entrance with their guns but not to shoot unless the saviors attacked first. The two women were speechless.
They fire first, one of us dies.
And let's hope, for my sake, that they don't.
Soon, the rolling door opened, and the man saw that there were many people outside. So he put down his gun and told his companions to come out quickly. They knew that not surrendering today could mean death. So they all put down their weapons. Morgan is still chasing the saviors in there, and he's got a cold face and he's killing people on sight. And then Morgan walks out. Eventually, Jesus and the rest of the group managed to subdue the remaining saviors. Morgan was lost in thought until someone greeted him. It was Jared. Morgan was ready to shoot, but once again, Jesus restrained him.
We're supposed to.
They surrendered. It's not what we do.
And what do we do, huh?
In this way, they managed to breach the satellite outposts, but at the cost of losing 2 of their team members. Next, Jesus planned to take these people back to the hilltop and let them live well. The woman had tried to lead people in a breakout, but all attempts had ended in failure, and her group was dwindling rapidly. Soon, she witnessed the dead turning into zombies, and a shocking suspicion crossed her mind. Could it be that the attackers outside were waiting for the people inside to turn into zombies? Just as she was rambling, a zombie lunged at her. In the end, Rick and his group attacked the stronghold, leaving no one alive. Though victorious, Rick and his team weren't joyous. War was brutal, and no one would choose to invade others if given a choice. The members of Alexandria's safe zone also suffered significant losses. Unfortunately, Aaron's boyfriend was also sacrificed and turned into a zombie. 10 minutes later, Rick emerged from the stronghold holding a baby. Regardless of the circumstances, the child was innocent. There's no way they're going to abandon this baby. They just have to find someone to take him back to the community now. That's when Aaron volunteers to go, as his boyfriend's sacrifice has left him heartbroken, and if he follows the rest of the action there's a good chance it'll affect everyone else. Rick expressed his regrets over the situation. In fact, it's good that the baby might ease Aaron's grief. After handing the baby to Aaron, Rick didn't have time for sentimentality. They couldn't find the heavy machine gun they were seeking in the stronghold, so they had to leave and rethink their plans. Just then, the 3 of them became alert as gunfire came from behind a tree. Rick analyzed the situation and concluded that there was only one person, so he called out, asking the person to come out and negotiate for a trade. They offered to exchange information about the heavy machine gun's location for a vehicle. The man believed Rick and came out with a handgun, and Rick also put down his gun. The man told them that the heavy machine gun had been in the stronghold but was moved to another location managed by Gavin yesterday. Feeling assured that Rick wasn't going to harm him, the man was about to leave when Daryl shot him. Rick looked at Daryl in disbelief but didn't say anything. Daryl's hatred for the saviors ran deep. It's the kingdom that's traveling to Gavin's stronghold, and they're making slow progress because of the distance. Ezekiel encouraged them on the way, assuring them that they would make it back alive. However, they received a message on the radio that the saviors had discovered their presence and were sending people to attack them. This walkie-talkie was given to them by Jesus and is for internal use by the saviors. The news made the group uneasy. Would they have to cancel the mission now that their whereabouts were known? Ezekiel smiled and said that even if the saviors knew, it didn't matter. He pulled out his knife and urged everyone not to worry. A few minutes later, the kingdom continued their journey, but it seemed that they were missing some members. After a while, whistling sounds came from all around the woods, and Ezekiel knew that the saviors had arrived. However, he didn't order his people to be on guard. Soon, dozens of armed saviors surrounded them. Ezekiel feigned fear and disbelief. But then, Carol and her group emerged from the trees, faced with an attack. The saviors have become a living target. In this battle, the kingdom didn't lose a single person, and Ezekiel was overjoyed. Most of the people he brought with him had families waiting for their safe return. The people at Gavin's stronghold sent out more men after hearing that their initial group had been wiped out. Unfortunately, they didn't get far before the kingdom ambushed them using the same tactic. 5 minutes later, the kingdom started to clean up the battlefield. All of the saviors were wiped out, and Ezekiel was pleasantly surprised. He didn't want to disappoint his people's expectations.
Not one.
Carol nodded and suggested that they should sweep the stronghold first for safety before celebrating. After saying that, she went to scout ahead. Ezekiel is going to take his men to dispose of the bodies before they turn into zombies. When Ezekiel turned around, he froze. There was no one left standing after a volley of fire, and there were broken limbs everywhere. Such was the power of the machine gun in the M2. After an unknown amount of time, the pile of bodies began to move. Ezekiel crawled out from underneath the bodies, his people sacrificing themselves to shield him from the bullets, allowing him to survive. However, his legs were still grazed. Dazed, Ezekiel looked around and realized he was the only one who had survived. The familiar faces that were laughing and talking with him just a moment ago were now lying on the ground, some without even a complete body. Ezekiel stood there in sorrow, and at that moment, his former people rose again as zombies. He wanted to join them in death, but he knew that his life was earned at the cost of their sacrifices, and he couldn't die just yet. The zombies closed in on him, and with his injured leg, Ezekiel could only move backwards slowly. He picked up a gun, hoping to use it as a crutch, but the pain in his leg was too intense, making it impossible for him to stand. As he was about to run out of options, one of his men appeared just in time to save him.
With my cane! I have to! I got to!
This man was far away before, which is probably why he survived. Meanwhile, inside the base, the saviors were dismantling a heavy machine gun, unaware that there was someone still alive below. These weapons were what Rick had been searching for. Carol had slipped inside the base earlier. Escaping danger, Carol discovered the people inside, and from their conversation, she learned that they were preparing to transport the heavy weapons to their main base to rescue Negan. After a while, these people were about to move. When they passed the room, gunshots rang out.
We got at least...
These people never saw who killed them. It was Carol who shot them. She was hiding on the roof of the building and shot them. Carol knew she couldn't stay there any longer. As footsteps approached, she swiftly left the area.
Let her go! Grab the gun.
The saviors, however, didn't chase Carol. Their mission is to take their weapons and rescue Negan. Meanwhile, Ezekiel was still trying to evade the zombies, and just as one of his men was about to reassure him, the man was shot dead. A man with a gun emerged from behind, looking excited as he approached Ezekiel to inspect him. Negan had already issued a notice that anyone who could capture Rick, Maggie, and Ezekiel alive would be rewarded handsomely. The man brought Ezekiel to the fence of the base, planning to enter and find a usable car to escape. The zombies outside are getting closer too, and the man tries to open the door. After trying for a few minutes and never being able to open the door, the man came up with an idea. Then the man took off Ezekiel's shirt and flung it over the fence. Ezekiel thought the man was going to help him climb over the fence, but instead, the man forcefully pushed him to the ground. The man was going to decapitate Ezekiel to bring the head back so he could get a reward too. The man was cut in half. Jerry, the fat bouncer, is still alive. Inside the base, the saviors loaded the heavy machine gun onto a car, getting ready to leave as quickly as possible. Carol couldn't let them get away, so she rushed out, but she was met with two guards who spotted her. Carol had no choice but to hide behind the car, and was greeted by a barrage of fire from the saviors. The firepower was so intense that Carol couldn't even look out. She noticed a button nearby that controlled the gate, and an idea formed in her mind. The men outside saw no movement inside and were ready to close in and check it out. At that moment a pistol was thrown and Carol's voice came out. She said not to kill her. She could tell them where the others were. They were hiding in ambush outside.
Nice and slow!
Carol puts her hands up and spins around, seeing that Carol had no weapons on her. The man had another man come up to check it out.
Where are they?
You can't tell them I told you. You have to promise. Please.
Hey, do you want to die? I asked you where your people are!
Lower your guns now!
Yago, please, man.
Joey just pooched it. Light him up!
I have to say Carol is a very quick thinker for a woman. The two men who fired the shots didn't even notice that the door behind them opened. The zombie walked in and then tragedy struck. The remaining two saviors hid behind the car after dealing with the zombies, and they had limited ammunition and dared not engage in a firefight. Carol held them at a standoff outside with her gun as she slowly moved to prepare to take care of these two first. Just then, she heard gunshots from a distance. It's Ezekiel and Jerry. The zombies are closing in. Carol's torn between helping Ezekiel and taking care of these two bastards. In the grand scheme of things, stopping the weapons from being taken is the right thing to do. Just when Ezekiel is desperate, gunshots ring out. The zombies in the vicinity are falling to the ground. Carol's here to rescue old friend. That's when the two saviors drove off in their car. It doesn't matter now. Saving Ezekiel and the others is the priority. Carol smiled. In the distance, the sound of motorcycles and cars confirmed that Rick and the group had arrived at the scene and likely noticed the car that had left the base. Their assumption was correct. Rick and Daryl knew that heavy weapons was in this stronghold and hurried here just in time to see the car leaving, so they also chased after it at the first opportunity. Daryl pulls out his pistol and fires 2 shots, but he's met by a big guy. Daryl was able to dodge it without being hurt. Rick's car was right behind, swerving left and right, skillfully dodging the bullets fired at them. The man who drove the car glanced at the mirror mouth corner of the contemptuous smile. Not waiting for him to be complacent for 3 seconds to look up the road, there are a few zombies. It is also to take advantage of this opportunity Rick accelerated to follow up. The two brothers work well together. Now things are easy. Rick drove straight up and drove side by side with the man. The man hit the gas pedal and drove the car, chasing after them. The two vehicles raced side by side, neither giving way. Then, in a swift move, Rick leaped over and onto the other car. The man tried to reach for his gun, but Rick pinned him down and stabbed him in the abdomen with a knife. Finally, Rick tossed him off the car. However, the car continued to veer out of control and crashed into the roadside fence. Daryl hurriedly rode over on his motorcycle to inspect the scene. By the time he arrived, the car had flipped, and Rick was nowhere to be seen. Daryl's heart sank as he worriedly scanned the area. Just as Daryl was thinking, Rick crawled out of the grass. Daryl breathed a sigh of relief and reached out to help Rick up. The operation had gone off flawlessly, and they hadn't lost the heavy machine gun. Subsequently, they approached the roadside. The guy Rick threw down is still alive but on his last legs. Rick asked the man what happened to the men who went to attack their stronghold and which side won. The man, barely breathing, said, "Neither side won."
Everyone's dead. Bullshit. There's no one else? You're the only one? Me. King. You're the Axeman. And this short-haired psycho lady.
Rick and Daryl exchanged a heavy glance. The people from the kingdom had all fallen.
Right now. Me too.
The man's final act of kindness was sharing this information with them. Rick's mood grew somber. This war was no longer just a personal vendetta. Despite its brutality, they had to continue, otherwise, everyone in the region would remain trapped in darkness. The two of them reached the bottom of a slope and retrieved a wooden crate from the car. Upon opening it, they discovered several bundles of explosives. Daryl was pleased with the surprise. Daryl tells Rick that now that the kingdom is dead, he can use the bombs to destroy the Savior's Gate and let the zombies pour in, and it will all be over before nightfall. Rick didn't know what to say. It was like this brother of his was possessed. Maybe Daryl stopped being indecisive the moment Denise died. Anyone who was the Saviors deserved to die. Rick felt compelled to remind him that many workers were inside, and their families as well. To kill Negan and all the resistance fighters is all that is needed. Daryl understood all of this, but he wanted to avoid tragedy repeating itself. Daryl is deliberately trying to avoid the issue, and he's not going to be soft, so he's going to do it, even if he doesn't have the support. Rick grabbed Daryl, urging him not to act rashly, and to stick to the original plan.
Negan and that other group? This is on them. People die. It's their fault, not ours.
Daryl, we can't do this.
Daryl doesn't care now. Seeing Daryl about to leave, Rick once again stepped in to stop him. This time Daryl fought back. Rick's eyes narrowed. This kid is for Rayall. He went straight for Daryl. The two brothers wrestled on the ground, and in the scuffle, Rick accidentally tossed the explosives a distance away. Daryl goes right up and locks Rick in a chokehold, and then the car bursts into flames. Rick realized it was bad. The two brothers looked at the car helplessly. Now there are no more heavy machine guns or explosives. Yet, this incident brought them both to their senses. After a few minutes, they calmed down considerably. Rick tried starting the car's engine, but it was beyond repair. Daryl rode his motorcycle over to Rick, and although he only gave him a brief look, no words were exchanged. The tension from their earlier fights still lingered in the air. In the end, it was Rick who came over and spoke first.
There's a plan. You gotta see it through.
You gotta win.
Yeah, we gotta. Chokehold's illegal, asshole.
Yes, it is.
A simple joke shows how men get along with each other. In the end, they parted ways, because according to the plan, Rick still has to do one more thing. After doing so, all of them will meet at the entrance of the Salvation Hall, and then completely end all of this. In this mission of attacking the 3 strongholds, the kingdom had the smoothest start, but the end was very miserable. At this moment, Carol and Jerry were escorting the injured Ezekiel back. The zombies still followed them. They entered a forest and came across a trench filled with zombies. The terrain was already difficult, and with an injured person, it became even more challenging. Ezekiel didn't want to burden them and suggested they leave him behind. Carol and Jerry couldn't possibly agree, so they insisted on helping Ezekiel down into the trench. The operation went well. They covered each other and soon reached the shore. Ezekiel doesn't want to go, and kills the zombies with his knife. Despite their advice, the deaths of his people made Ezekiel feel guilty, and he had no face to go back to his family.
You can't! Can't leave you, Your Majesty! Come on, man, just go! You're my king! No, I'm not! I'm not your king! I'm not your Majesty! Look at what's in front of us! That's what's real! Go! Whoa! I ain't no king.
Just as he was losing hope, his tiger Shiva charged out. Shiva disappeared when they were attacked, but now it's back. Shiva's appearance restored some of Ezekiel's sanity, and he began to climb back up to the surface. However, as he turned to look, he saw Shiva surrounded by zombies.
Please, Jerry! Damn it, let me help her!
2 hours later, they returned to the kingdom. Ezekiel refused assistance from Carol and Jerry, determined to walk in on his own. The residents welcomed their king, but their expressions were filled with confusion about their missing loved ones. Carol and Jerry halted in front of them, and Henry, Benjamin's brother, approached. Ezekiel didn't have the courage to look up in front of the crowd and didn't have the courage to communicate with them. He just limped through the crowd. In this moment, the King Ezekiel's silhouette appeared desolate and forlorn. Among the welcoming women, tears had started flowing, knowing that their husbands and brothers would never return. And on the way to the hilltop, a line of people marched in great numbers. None other than Tara and others who had taken the Savior's captives with them. Tara and Morgan wanted to kill them all, but Jesus insisted on not killing innocent people and bringing them back, and he believed that Maggie would agree with him. As they were walking, the crazy Jared said to Morgan. He had been watching Morgan and felt that he was different from the others. "Why is your armor so much smaller than everyone else's? It's like it's shrunken." "Oh, my God, is this the kid's? What are you wearing that for?" It didn't protect the kid. The discovery made Jared laugh. Little did he know, Morgan was struggling to restrain himself from taking action. Just as Morgan raised his gun, someone shouted about zombies on the hill. The group turned to see the fence breaking, and zombies tumbling down. Tara and the others had to kill the zombies rolling down the slope, but the numbers grew, and some of the bound saviors were bitten. Jared saw that everyone was busy and immediately shouted at the people behind him to hurry up and run away. Seeing this, Morgan immediately chased after them. The remaining captives also wanted to flee, but the man in the white shirt warned them against running, explaining they'd be shot if they did. The escaping group vanished into the woods. Jared, whom Morgan hated the most, was inside. How could he allow them to escape? It gave Morgan a reason to kill them. Someone fell to the ground, and because they were bound together by ropes, everyone stopped. Morgan approached calmly, furious. Morgan turned to Jesus and said, "They got away." And then, when they get the chance, they run away again, time and again. You think they're gonna change, become good people? They won't ever change. Jesus interrupts Morgan, claiming that they'll find another way to house these people. He believed they could eventually live together peacefully after the war. Morgan didn't want to hear Jesus spouting those words. His mind was consumed with anger and hatred. So, he attacked Jesus. First round. Second round. Third round. Fourth round. Fifth round. Morgan's combat skills were unmatched, but his ideals were unrecognized. Now Morgan is being educated by the nimble Jesus because he is overwhelmed by hatred. This time, Jesus didn't resist. Only now did Morgan regain some clarity. Realizing he had lost control, he picked up the sniper rifle from the ground. Morgan left them. He feared he might lose control again if he stayed, so he headed toward the Savior's outposts. Meanwhile, Enid noticed a car approaching from a distance. Gregory brazenly returns to the hilltop station. A few minutes later, the door opened slightly, just a crack. Maggie stared at the shameless man and asked why he was driving Gabriel's car and where Gabriel was. Gregory claimed the car was just there, and he hadn't seen the priest. Maggie's tone turned icy as she inquired why he was back. Gregory said it was his home, the place he built. Unlike some others who appeared out of nowhere, panicked, Gregory quickly began to apologize, saying he was just scared and didn't mean any harm. He admitted he was wrong and begged Maggie for mercy. "We're all just regular people. We all make mistakes." Maggie looked down and pondered, not knowing what to do. In the end, she let Gregory in. One reason is that Gregory built this community. Another was that this kind of person wasn't even worth killing. They'd give him one more chance. Just as Maggie left the guard post, someone called out to her again. Jesus had returned with the captured saviors. The first person to object was Gregory. He kept yelling that they couldn't put executioners here, that it was absolutely unacceptable. Maggie shared Tara's sentiment. Living here are the residents of the hilltop, and if something goes wrong, nobody can bear that responsibility. Yet, Jesus was adamant. He proposed keeping them in custody for now and deciding what to do after the war. In the end, Maggie had little choice but to relent. Thousands of zombies surged in, completely surrounding the Savior's compound. There's another figure running through the zombie horde, Gabriel, who's been left behind. Gabriel dashed into a motorhome in the backyard, only to find Negan inside. Suddenly, Negan accelerated and tackled Gabriel to the ground, seizing his weapons. First the rifle, then the knife. Gabriel didn't resist. In the current situation, death was inevitable sooner or later. Negan didn't kill Gabriel. He extended a hand and helped him up. After everything was done, Negan sits down on the wall with a cozy look on his face and tells Gabriel not to make any noise or the zombies will stay active. Negan was known for his brutality and senseless killing, but he had his own beliefs. He named his group the Saviors because he believed his methods were saving people. Though Negan's words seemed reasonable, upon closer examination, they appeared contradictory. They're all trapped here, and they can only hope that Negan's men can figure out a way to get rid of the zombies, or else they're just waiting to die here. Inside the building, Negan's 5 deputies are in a meeting, and they're not sure if Negan is alive or dead. Regina believes that they should send 40 workers to clear the zombies, having them stand back to back, and create a pathway. Eugene promptly disagreed with the idea. The others looked at the genius with curiosity to see his expert analysis. Eugene explained that given the density of the zombie horde outside, even with 40 workers forming a formation and armed with close combat weapons, they'd be surrounded and wiped out within minutes. Regina explained that was the intention. The workers were meant to draw the zombies' attention. They only need to send out a small team to break out. Once successful, they can contact the strongholds outside, and this crisis can be easily solved. Unbeknownst to them, the 3 major strongholds had already been taken out. Eugene opposed again, highlighting that resources were dwindling, and provoking a conflict between the workers and the Saviors could end disastrously. Dwight agreed and added his support to Eugene's viewpoint. There are so many workers, they should be brought together instead of being sent to their deaths. Gavin chimed in, suggesting they shouldn't focus on this issue for now. Even if they managed to break out, there were Rick's snipers waiting outside. The priority was to quickly identify the traitor within. The fact that the leaders of the 3 major strongholds were attacked right after arriving indicated that someone in their midst was leaking information. After saying this, the other deputies also thought deeply. It's true that there are too many doubts in this case, as if Rick knows everything about them. The traitor is naturally Dwight, who is a bit panicked at the moment, and can only try to turn his attention back to the workers again. Simon spoke, never taking his eyes off Eugene. Within the Saviors, suspicion of a traitor would naturally fall on Eugene due to his previous affiliation with Rick's group. However, lacking evidence, they couldn't do much. The meeting concluded. Sometime later, Dwight pondered their next moves in the room. Suddenly, a knock sounded at the door. He opened it. Finding Eugene standing there, Eugene approached, holding a can of pickles from his collection, expressing gratitude for Dwight's support during the meeting. After a few pleasantries, Eugene was drawn to the handmade figurines inside Dwight's house, which Dwight had made by hand. Dwight pointed out that the paint on top wasn't dry yet. However, it was too late. Eugene's hands were already stained with paint. It was a minor incident, and after a brief conversation, Eugene left the room. Meanwhile, Negan realized his men wouldn't come looking for him, so he prepared to save himself. He smeared zombie guts all over his body. With everything in place, they created noise to attract the zombies, then opened the car door, luring the surrounding zombies inside. So they went outside and carefully walked through the zombie horde. As Gabriel was walking, he tripped over a corpse and fell to the ground. Although Gabriel stood up in time, he was still spotted by a zombie, but Negan stepped in to save him in time. The 5 deputies reconvened in the conference room for another meeting. Usually, Gavin's outpost would have sent supplies today, but there had been no news. Gavin speculated that they had likely been attacked by Rick's group. A well-calculated move. While they're discussing what to do, this woman walks in because something big is happening outside. The workers on the first floor had revolted. When they come out, the corridors are filled with workers. The building was sealed off. Facilities were damaged, and the temperature on the first floor had become unbearable. The workers had also heard rumors of a plan to use them as bait for the zombies, which further fueled their anger. Negan seems to be dead or alive, so the workers have come to the first floor to demand an explanation. Simon tells them to go back to the ground floor. This is no place for workers, but this time the workers are a little more forceful and they all come out to complain about the terrible conditions. Some even take out their weapons. Just then, a familiar whistle sounded and everyone knelt down consciously, because they all knew the man was back. Negan said something to stabilize the troops in front of the group and then left. All he wanted to do now was to go and have a shower and something to eat. As for Gabriel, Negan just told his men to lock him up. An hour later, Negan called for a meeting. The workers were rioting badly and a lot of guns had been recovered from their hands. What's more, these guns were from their own warehouse, implying insider involvement. Otherwise, the guns wouldn't have been stolen right under their noses. Eugene seemed to notice something. There was a bit of brown paint on the backpack. Then Eugene carefully rubbed his thumb open and it was the same color on it. Suddenly, it clicked in his mind. The traitor was none other than Dwight. But Eugene doesn't say anything but slowly turns his attention to Dwight. Dwight appeared to sense something, as if this guy had discovered his secret. After the meeting concluded, Eugene left the room burdened with thoughts, but Negan stopped him in his tracks. Negan came up to him with a smile on his face and said that he had a great opportunity here. If Eugene can use his ingenuity to take care of the zombies outside, Negan will make Eugene happier than he's ever been before. But if Eugene gave it his all and still failed, Negan would ensure Eugene met a swift end before food and water ran out, sparing him a slow, agonizing death. Negan asked Eugene if he would be able to resolve this matter. Eugene nodded. It wasn't even a choice. A while later, Eugene stood at the entrance of the prison cell. Knowing that Gabriel was confined within, Eugene brought some supplies to make Gabriel's life a little easier. Eugene hadn't turned evil. Circumstances had forced him into siding with the Saviors for survival. Eugene opened the door and saw that Gabriel was in bad shape and looked like he had contracted some kind of disease. Concerned, Eugene decided to take Gabriel to Dr. Harlan for medical help. On the other side, Rick opened a discarded microwave and retrieved 2 letters from inside. They were from the Kingdom and the Hilltop. As Rick read the letters, he walked towards the distance. They had agreed beforehand that, regardless of the outcome of their assaults on the strongholds, they would keep each other informed through letters. The Kingdom suffered the heaviest losses. Almost all those who were able to fight died. The survivors could only find solace in mourning and greeting for those they had lost. Ezekiel is devastated, leaving Carol alone to run the show. Aaron arrived at the hilltop with the child and delivered the letters to Maggie. In the letters, Rick informed them that the situation was even tougher than they had imagined, but they couldn't back down. They had to press forward. Sasha had provided an opportunity for counterattack, and more sacrifices would follow. They need to fight for them. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Currently, the saviors were surrounded by zombies, trapped without supplies or reinforcements. As time passed, their strength waned, with snipers stationed outside their doors. Anyone from the saviors who ventured out met certain death. Rick had a task to complete now. He's going to run an errand now, and meet at the Salvation Hall in 2 days' time to bring a final end to all of this. We've fought our way up to this point. We've been through a lot. Victory will be ours. The destination Rick was headed to was the junkyard. With the kingdom's forces unavailable, Rick is planning to persuade the scavengers to join him in taking action to eliminate the saviors in 2 days' time. Despite their previous treachery, they are a powerful force. Jadis is confused when she sees Rick coming alone. What is Rick doing here after what she did to him before? Rick explained his purpose. Rick is so confident that the demise of the saviors is only one step away that he believes the scavengers will not refuse to join him. Unexpectedly, the scavengers declined, which took Rick by surprise. Jadis seemed unaware of the harsh reality of the world. Rick was also taken down and locked up. At the hilltop, the captives brought back by Jesus waited outside the walls, awaiting Maggie's final decision. Jesus is very nervous. Yesterday there was news that a gallows was being built inside, but Jesus realized that they had actually built a prison instead. After a night of contemplation, Maggie decided to lock up the captives. If anything went awry in the battle against the saviors, these people could be used as bargaining chips. Of course, letting these people live is also taking into account Jesus' idea. Maggie made another decision, to imprison Gregory as well. The people of the hilltop were visibly relieved. They hadn't forgotten how Gregory had betrayed them. Things are over here at the hilltop for now. As Aaron prepared to leave the hilltop, Enid followed him, inquiring about his destination. Aaron thought about it and didn't say no to Enid. This war affects everyone, so he told Enid to hurry up and pack his things. With 2 days to go before the war started, Aaron had to do something to make sure the war was won. At the Alexandria safe zone, Michonne wanted to drive out alone, claiming she just wanted to hang out. But Rosita knew exactly what Michonne was thinking, so she got in the passenger seat and went along. Michonne didn't say much and simply drove away. They hadn't been gone long when Daryl arrived at the infirmary door. He was here to see Tara. Rick decided to attack the saviors in 2 days, but Rick didn't want to hurt the innocent workers. However, Daryl was less concerned about that and wanted to swiftly resolve the situation. He came to find Tara to team up. Their plan was simple: breach the saviors building, let the zombies flood in, and end it all. On the highway, Rosita and Michonne engaged in a conversation. During the previous attack on the Savior's outpost, they hadn't been able to participate in the battle due to their injuries, and it left them feeling quite uneasy. Rick's plan is still 2 days away and Michonne doesn't want to wait at home, so she's ready to head to the Saviors to keep an eye on them. They chatted as they drove along, but soon stopped, because of the loud music coming from the woods. It was so loud that it could be heard all over the place. They took out their weapons and followed the direction of the sound. Although it was still some distance away from the Salvation Hall and the zombies there shouldn't be able to hear it, they still wanted to find out as much as they could. Through the forests, they reached a small town, and the music was coming from a house. They quietly felt their way in. There are many tools and weapons here. It should be a weapons warehouse, and there's a man and a woman's voice coming from inside, just discussing Rick being an arsehole or something like that. From their conversation, Michonne and Rosita guessed that they should be the saviors, who went out to look for supplies and just came back, and also saw the zombies outside the Salvation Hall, and the traces of the explosion. Now, they were planning to use the music to divert the zombies away and expecting a reward from Negan. Rosita looks inside and sees that they've already loaded up a truck with speakers. They can't let them take the truck away. Michonne approached quietly, intending to launch a surprise attack. However, her previous injuries hindered her from being at her best, and she didn't notice the small ball on the ground. The two saviors outside immediately went on high alert upon noticing their presence. Rosita also took out her pistol and prepared to attack from behind the shelves, but they spotted her first. The saviors didn't expect someone to sneak in, so they split up and searched for them. As Michonne carefully advanced with her handgun, the woman knocked the gun out of Michonne's hand. Michonne retaliated, causing the woman to drop her rifle as well. Michonne's first counterattack also knocked the woman's rifle to the ground, but her own injuries made Michonne uncomfortable as well. The woman pulls off a steel pipe, She can see that Michonne is injured. The man hears this and prepares to drive off in his car. Rosita was in a hurry, but she didn't have a weapon on her. But the next thing she saw was something familiar. The man was hurrying towards the car, and when he reached the corner,
Baby girl.
Drop it.
Michonne hears an explosion. The woman took the opportunity to escape and quickly got into the car. Michonne, concerned about Rosita, didn't pursue. By the time they got out, the car was gone. This is bad. They didn't know what to do for a while. This thing will definitely draw all the zombies away when it gets to the Salvation Hall. The world is really amazing. This is the only thought in their mind. The driver of the car turned out to be Daryl. He and Tara had also been heading to the Salvation and came over when they heard the music, unwittingly resolving a threat. Michonne briefed them on the situation. Looks like the saviors are doomed. With everyone aligned in their purpose, they set off together. By evening, they finally arrived near the outskirts of the Salvation. Michonne took the binoculars and saw the current situation of the saviors and let out a breath of relief in her heart. The snipers were the first to notice their arrival. Morgan sees that it's Daryl and the others, so he tells the other snipers not to be nervous. It's their own people. Daryl and Tara's plan was straightforward. Crash a vehicle into the building, allowing the zombies to flood in and end it all. Rosita and Michonne chose not to participate. On one hand, they were concerned about the innocent workers inside. On the other, they were intent on following Rick's plan. Tara is also trying to persuade them, cautioning that if they wait for 2 more days, there might be unforeseen variables. The incident with the speakers just now is an example of such a variable. That's when Morgan walks out. He supports Daryl too, and he wants to end this sooner than later the saviors. Morgan says that when Daryl makes his move, the snipers will cover the car. It's not that Daryl doesn't trust Rick, it's that all of the kingdom's brothers have died. There won't be enough men to force the saviors to surrender. Although Rick went to the scavengers to talk about cooperation, those people have betrayed their trust before and cannot be trusted. In the end, Rosita made it clear that she wouldn't participate because she believed Rick would take care of it, and it was because of her recklessness that Sasha died. Rosita is gone, but Daryl won't give up. It's not just his obsession to destroy the saviors, it's Tara's and Morgan's too. They have all suffered the consequences of their indecision in the past, resulting in the deaths of loved ones. They don't want to let tragedy repeat itself.
You solve this thing with the bad-smelling convention outside? I assure you, I will kill you quickly so you don't have to see all the awful, horrific things that are gonna go down here when we run out of food and water.
In the previous episode, it was revealed that Eugene had discovered Dwight's treachery, but he chose to keep it quiet. Eugene approached Dwight alone and told him that he knew everything, and that Negan had personally arranged for him to find a solution to the zombie problem, and that Dwight's role as a traitor was likely to get in the way of that. As a result, Eugene demands that Dwight stop all acts of betrayal. In exchange, he promises not to reveal Dwight's actions to Negan or anyone else. Unfazed by being exposed, Dwight remained calm. He did not fear death. On the contrary, he feared not being able to witness Negan's death. Dwight grabbed Eugene by the collar, slowly pushing him down onto a seat, and began to speak. The saviors are on the brink of extinction and Negan is about to meet his demise. The former glory of this place will soon become a thing of the past. Food and water are dwindling, discontent among the workers is rising, and fear is spreading among the saviors' ranks. Dwight understood that Eugene's loyalty was driven more by a fear of death than true allegiance. To stand on the winning side, Dwight continued, "All you need to do is nothing, just wait patiently." Dwight went on, "You've witnessed the horrors that have unfolded here, heard the screams, and seen the faces branded with the iron. You haven't killed anyone yet, and when the day comes that they ask you to, you'll never be the same again." These words did not impress Eugene, whose aim was simply to stay alive. He enjoyed a comfortable life and a high position within the saviors. As he walked to the door, Eugene still warned Dwight that he wouldn't blow the whistle on him as long as Dwight didn't do anything to endanger the place. With that, Eugene left. Eugene then came to the door of the ground floor. Outside is a burst of zombie hissing sound. He asked the woman how much longer can hold out. The woman said helplessly, "It should be a day or maybe 2 days. Who knows?" Eugene stared outside, lost in thought. Determined, Eugene had resolved to use his intellect to help them escape. Harlan, the doctor, called him into the infirmary. There, Gabriel lay, infected with a virus from smearing zombie guts on himself. The virus, while not immediately fatal, can cause organ failure, but there are no antibiotics available here. After a while, Gabriel woke up, still asking Eugene if he could get Dr. Harlan out of there. Eugene couldn't possibly agree. He wouldn't risk his life for anyone. In the afternoon, Eugene locked himself inside a room, as he had thought of a possible solution to perhaps divert the approaching horde of zombies. He disassembled a tape recorder and removed the amplifier from it. The next thing needed was a music player. Eugene thought of a location, a warehouse. There's a coffin parked here, the same one Sasha had. Eugene recalls the scene. Not only did Eugene fall silent, but he also pondered whether helping the saviors escape was the right thing to do. However, he quickly became resolute in his decision. He opened the coffin and found Sasha's MP3 player inside. 3 hours later, Eugene completed his contraption, a makeshift drone with a sound system to draw the zombies away. Eugene was about to flip the switch on the player.
Don't turn around.
And it was Dwight who stopped him.
Back away from it.
Trembling, Eugene stuttered that he only wanted to save lives. He warned Dwight that killing him would be akin to killing everyone present. Once the drone takes off, it can help free this place. Dwight interrupted Eugene and said, when Negan gets out, he's going to kill Rick, Daryl, Rosita, and all your old friends. In fact, Eugene was not only trying to save others but also mostly saving himself.
We can get rid of Negan. Just Negan. We're almost there.
Negan ain't the dying type, Dwight.
Oh, but you are, Eugene.
I am. That's exactly why I have not yet stepped back, as it were. By my reckoning, I have two selects on facing my fate. One, I abort launch on this glider. Don't free this place from the stranglehold of cold teeth/tongues, and Negan will likely execute me as what he considers to be a personal favor. Or I could go for what's behind door number 2. Take my chances being shot in the back by a sometime ally despite any injury I may have caused in the past. By delivering a chomp down on your chode.
After Eugene finished speaking, he bent down, realizing that either way, he would die. So he took a gamble that Dwight wouldn't kill him. The plane successfully flew out. However, immediately after that, as Eugene turned back, he realized that Dwight had vanished without a trace. That's when Tara started shooting at the building to cover the truck's entry. Morgan is also covering Daryl with a sniper rifle. Daryl sees that it's close enough. He puts a brick on the accelerator. Then Daryl leaps, and the truck crashes into the building. The car crushed the zombies along the way and finally crashed into the building, making a huge hole in it. Tara and Daryl achieved their goal and quickly escaped the area. Let's leave the rest to the zombies. As expected, the zombies couldn't wait to pour through the hole. Within minutes, the first floor of the Saviors building was overrun with zombies. In a few minutes, the ground floor of the Saviors building was filled with zombies. Screams and gunshots filled the hall. Although a few deputies led the resistance, many workers were killed by the zombies. Eugene looked down in horror at the scene below. It wasn't what he wanted to see. He didn't want these people to die. He also feared the same fate for himself. So Eugene was furious at the behavior of Rick's team. Eugene went straight to Gabriel and scolded him very seriously. Eugene made it clear that he would never do anything for them, never agree to any of his requests. He wouldn't end up like Sasha and Abraham. Eugene declared, "You have made the gravest mistake, and now you can only watch as your end approaches. I am Negan, and I will ensure the survival of this place. I will not protect any traitors. Dr. Harlan would be better off here in his comfort zone, just in case I need him. I'm not going to beat myself up about it. Who doesn't want to live?" With that, Eugene slammed the door and left. Shortly after, Eugene found Negan once again and presented another solution, this time with full confidence. In order to prevent the potential disruption from traitorous Dwight, Eugene decided to expose him to Negan. Just as Eugene was about to speak, a knocking sound from outside interrupted them. Several other lieutenants entered to report on the situation downstairs. Negan calmed them down, announcing that Eugene had found a solution and made a significant discovery. Dwight's heart lurched and a bad feeling filled him.
I think I could fix the intercom system. Which, would absolutely change the face of communications here. That's it?
Eugene held back, not because he had a crush on Dwight, but because of his own personality. Eugene faced a dilemma. He was torn between wanting to maintain his privileged position within the Saviors and not wanting to sabotage Rick's group's plans. After all, Rosita, who had always protected him, and Tara, whom he secretly loved, were still there. After a long time of deep thinking, Eugene picked up the wine on the table and drank it, once again reinforcing his idea that the most important thing is to live, and that emotions are a burden. The next day, hundreds of zombies congregated outside the Savior's Gate. Morgan, as usual, maintained his watch over the opposite building. He soon noticed the Saviors emerging from the upper floors, armed and shooting at the zombies below. The snipers are talking over the radio, wondering what the Saviors are doing. If the Saviors keep shooting like this, they can kill the zombies, but the bullets will be exhausted. As the gunfire continues, the zombies below begin to fall to the ground, but soon Morgan realized what they were doing. By shooting, the zombie corpses are piled up to form a wall so that the zombies on both sides can't pass through, thus leaving a blank space at the entrance. Inside, the Saviors quickly come out and shoot at the sniper's position. Morgan knows that the Saviors are out of the trap, so he can only tell everyone to evacuate.
Out now! Get out! Everybody get out now!
Staying here will only lead to death. Morgan quickly ran downstairs as well. Just as Morgan reached the ground floor, the door was opened, and it looked like the Saviors had already surrounded him. Morgan could only leave through the back door, but just as he came out, he saw several zombies outside. Morgan thought of a way out and banged on the banister. The zombies were attracted by the sound and approached Morgan. After escaping their confinement, the Saviors, led by Gavin, departed towards a distant location. Morgan continued to follow, realizing their destination was the kingdom. Of course, Rick doesn't know all this, but he's still being held by the scavengers, and his clothes have already been stripped off. He was also made to play all kinds of games, not knowing what kind of tricks he was going to play today. Rick is then pinned to the ground and the door of the container slowly opens and Jadis walks out with a zombie. This woman is going to play the same game as in the beginning. It seems to be very interesting to tease Rick.
Time for after.
A man lay naked on the ground. Waiting for what awaited him was a terrifying zombie. Rick cursed silently in his mind. This woman was really a pervert. Jadis gave a faint smile, curious to see if Rick's tough exterior was unyielding as ever. Without hesitation, Jadis signaled her subordinates to push the zombie forward. The zombie drew closer, and Rick's mind raced to formulate a plan of action. Rick wasn't one to sit idly by, waiting for his fate. The scavengers didn't expect Rick to resist even with his hands bound. Rick forcefully pushed away the man controlling the zombie, knocking him down. Seizing the opportunity, Rick grabbed hold of the control rod. After a fierce struggle, Rick managed to lift the zombie's head off with the pole. Using the other end of the rod, Rick knocked out the man. Jadis attempted to shoot from behind Rick, but he sensed her and charged to disarm her. Rick pinned Jadis to the ground. Hearing the commotion, the scavengers rushed in with their guns, surrounding the scene. Rick remained composed. He pushed Jadis closer to the zombie's head. If any of them dared to make a move, he wouldn't hesitate to act. Jadis was starting to fear the madness of Rick. She quickly raised her right hand, clenching it into a fist. The scavengers put away their guns when they saw the boss's gesture.
We done?
Hearing Jadis soften, Rick stood up. Jadis just wanted to use zombies to scare Rick. After all, if Rick died, Alexandria's safe zone will not let them go. They just didn't expect Rick to react so well. Once they were all on their feet, Jadis spoke up and asked, "If we join you, what's next?" Rick replied with satisfaction, "The Saviors are trapped, surrounded by thousands of zombies outside. You and your people will come with me there. Once people from the other communities arrive, we'll demand the Saviors surrender. I'll personally take care of Negan." Jadis agreed this time, though they requested a quarter share of the spoils upon success. An hour later, an agreement was reached. They set off in a truck toward the Savior's location. The vehicle halted on the outskirts of the Savior's territory. Rick intended to lead them in quietly to observe the Savior's situation. but something seemed to miss up ahead. Rick signaled the others to wait as he cautiously approached the scene. The sight before him troubled Rick deeply. The sniper from the safe zone lay dead. After dealing with the zombies, Rick tried to communicate with the other snipers using his radio, but received no response. Rick realized something was wrong and picked up the sniper rifle on the ground and climbed towards the top of the tower. Climbed to the highest point, Rick took down the gun and used the 8x lens to look towards the Church of Salvation. What he saw sent shivers down his spine. The thousands of zombies were gone, vanished without a trace. What was happening? Fear gripped Rick's heart. Rick didn't tell the scavengers what he saw, but brought them to the entrance of the Saviors to see what was going on. Could they already be at war with the Saviors? As they approached, a scene of devastation met their eyes, with traces of piled up zombies on the ground.
From picture.
Rick yelled out instructions to Jotties. The shooter was at the windows. Everyone, return fire and retreat. But when Rick turned around, he found that the group had abandoned him and fled. Some things never change. Just as Rick pondered his escape, a vehicle pulled up in front of him. It was Carol and Jerry. They had also come to regroup here. Not expecting this situation, they realized the Saviors had found a way to break free. The nearby snipers had been taken care of. Retaliation from the Saviors was inevitable. They had to find a way to alert everyone. Carl crept into the woods while they were here. Carl's purpose in coming here was to find someone, a boy who was in the midst of killing zombies.
Hey.
The boy appeared visibly nervous, but Carl gestured for him to relax, assuring him of no harm. In fact, Rick and Carl had come across this boy before, but Rick had shot him discreetly to scare him away. Carl felt compelled to help him and had been searching for him ever since. Carl wanted to assist this boy, who was about his age. After hearing Carl's explanation, the boy introduced himself as Siddiq. Carl offered Siddiq food and water, soothing his nerves, explaining that not everyone in the apocalypse was a threat. Siddiq had clearly endured much hardship. Carl's explanation helped Siddiq let his guard down. He approached the food, drinking water in gulps. Once he finished, Siddiq sincerely thanked Carl. Carl explained his intentions, expressing his desire to bring Siddiq back to the community, though he needed to go through Rick's 3 questions first.
How many walkers have you killed? I know it's hard to keep track.
237.
Really?
Give or take a couple.
How many people have you killed?
1.
Why?
The dead tried to kill him, but they didn't.
You're making walker traps. Is that how you killed so many?
It's only part of it. My mom thought or hoped that killing them would free their souls.
Siddiq's responses satisfied Carl, and they set out to return to the community. On the way, the two saw 3 zombies eating a deer, and they slowly approached to kill it. Initially, it seemed easy, but more zombies arrived quickly. Siddiq faced off against the zombies while Carl rushed to help but was knocked aside by one of them. He could only barely keep them from biting him, but another zombie comes along soon after and this puts more pressure on Carl. With 2 zombies he can't fight them off. Siddiq was trapped by another zombie, unable to assist. With all his strength, Carl drew his handgun and managed to shoot down the 2 zombies pinning him. Both of them are breathing heavily. It was so dangerous just now. Siddiq notices that Carl looks a little pale and asks him what's wrong. Carl says he's fine and continues on with Siddiq. Upon returning to the community, Carl instructed Siddiq to hide in the sewer temporarily. Before formally accepting Siddiq, Carl needed to discuss and gain his father's approval. After making arrangements for Siddiq, Carl removed his blood-stained clothes at home. Carl's discomfort earlier was due to being bitten by a zombie in the abdomen. Knowing his impending death, Carl's calm acceptance and courage in the face of death were beyond his years. It was hard to believe he was just a child. Although he couldn't bear to leave his father and Judith Michonne, Carl showed great maturity and didn't cry hysterically. Carl stood on the wall, gazing into the distance. Rick and the others were out looking for the scavengers and wouldn't return immediately. Michonne had also gone off, leaving only a note for Carl. Worried that he might not survive until their return, Carl started writing letters, addressing them to his father, Michonne, and his friend Enid, among others. With the letters written, Carl brought supplies to the sewer to help Siddiq settle in temporarily. The rest of the time Carl is going to spend with his sister and try to leave some trace in her life. The most heartbreaking thing was that Carl always had a smile on his face, as if death was really a trivial matter. Soon, Michonne returned in her car. They greeted each other as usual. In the evening, the whole Alexandria safe zone assembled again and prepared to leave for the Church of the Redeemer. Tomorrow was the agreed-upon meeting time with Rick. Daryl thought that the zombie influx had decimated the Saviors and that they just needed to wrap things up, not realizing that Eugene had helped the Saviors out. As night fell, Carl intended to give some supplies to Siddiq when Michonne called him from behind. They were about to leave, and Michonne wanted to say goodbye to Carl. Carl was just about to explain about Siddiq when there was a knock outside.
You may be wondering why the hell your lookout didn't sound the alarm. See, we are polite. I mean, I don't know when they're gonna wake up from that kind of shock, but they should wake up. So let's just cut through the cow shit. You lose. It's over. So you're gonna line up in front of your little houses and you're gonna work up some apologies. And then the person with the latest one is gonna get killed. Then I kill Rick in front of everybody and we move on. You have 3, count them, 3 minutes to open this gate or we start bombing the shit out of you.
They got out.
Everyone looks at each other in disbelief. How could it be the Saviors? How did they get out of the trap? Rick and the other 3 are still driving, preparing to go back and deliver the message. At that moment, in the kingdom, Ezekiel sat despondently in the hall, suddenly hearing unusual noises from outside. He rushes out with his injuries to check. As soon as Ezekiel reaches the door, he hears the sound of someone breaking in, and he has to run for cover. The Saviors had arrived. Meanwhile, on the highway, Maggie led the Hilltops people toward the Redeemer, preparing to rendezvous with Rick's group. However, they noticed a large tree up ahead on the road, something that hadn't been there before. Maggie realized the danger and immediately ordered a retreat. She called out twice but received no response from the group. When they turned back, several vehicles were closing in from behind. Tension gripped everyone. Their only guess was that the Saviors were pursuing them. Soon, a truck pulled up ahead of them. The door swung open. Their faces turned grim. It was Jerry. The vehicles behind them were quickly brought under control. Now they were at the mercy of the others. Jerry was taken out of the truck. 2 others carried a box and placed it in front of the vehicles, a coffin. The boy had been bitten by a zombie, but he didn't inform anyone. Instead, he changed into clean clothes and left letters for his father and close friends. After completing these tasks, he dedicated the remaining time to his sister. Carl is more calm and stable than an adult. He has a father who was a stand-up guy as a role model. He aspired to be the kind of man his father was. Unfortunately, Carl's last day would not be an ordinary one. The Saviors had escaped. At that moment, Negan's obnoxious voice echoed outside, declaring that they had 3 minutes to open the gates, or he would blow the place up. Carl knows he's running out of time, and for the first time, he takes command of the group. He instructed Daryl and the others to drive out in a vehicle. Pretending to flee, they set up traps along the road to ambush the Saviors. Meanwhile, the remaining members of the community would hide in the sewers. Negan's voice outside is even more arrogant. 1 more minute and he's going to attack. Carl tells them to hurry up. He'll go and buy everyone some time. And outside the door, Negan calls out to Rick on the microphone. Some say the reason why Negan doesn't attack is because he has a personal philosophy that people are the most important resource in the last days. That's why he doesn't usually go on a rampage. He just makes an example out of them. However, Rick's lack of response angered Negan immensely. Negan was about to tell his men to open fire. Carl heard Negan and said calmly, "Don't go on like this. There are many families, many children here, including his sister Judith." Negan retorted patiently, "Well, goddamn, that just shatters my heart. There are kids in the Saviors too. You must have seen them. There's even a little baby at the outposts. Who knows what you guys did to it?" When Carl didn't say anything, Negan thought the baby was dead and his expression became serious. Negan continued, stating that the events of the day would not end there. Someone had to step up and take charge to ensure such things didn't happen again. He proclaimed himself as the savior they needed. Carl earnestly responded, acknowledging that the events had unfolded, but they could find ways to stop the fighting.
Kill me.
What did you say?
Negan was taken aback, surprised by Carl's words. Carl continued, stating that he didn't want to die, but he would if it could prevent more bloodshed or change Negan's mindset. Is that what the world is supposed to be like? Is that what you want to be? To be honest, Negan was touched by Carl's words and actions. He greatly appreciated the child's courage and sense of the bigger picture, which endeared him to Negan. As they conversed, Daryl and the group had already prepared the truck, ready to follow Carl's plan to ram through the walls and feign escape. Outside, the saviors had tightly encircled the community. Hearing the sound of the truck, they immediately went on high alert.
Cars aren't going to be enough, D. We should have had the trucks.
Oh, it'll hold.
As soon as Dwight finished speaking, the truck led by Daryl crashed through the fence and ran away from the roadblockers. Dwight ordered his men to pursue, while the woman reported the situation to Negan and led her group after them. Negan was still immersed in the emotions stirred by Carl's words and actions initially, when Negan learned of this news.
Son of a bitch, Carl! Was that just a play? I thought we were having a moment, you little asshole! Move the word!
He gave the order, and his men launched grenades into the community. Carl saw the saviors firing and quickly retreated, throwing smoke grenades as he went. The wound from the zombie bite grew more painful, but Carl pushed through the pain. These maniacs have a lot of power in their grenades, and it looks like they're really going to level the place. Out on the road, as Daryl and his group burst out according to Carl's plan, they parked the truck in the middle of the road and took cover on either side of the woods. Soon they hear the sound of cars coming up behind them. Daryl threw a smoke grenade, obscuring the vision of the approaching vehicles.
Stop the car.
Just want to take a closer look.
D, stop the damn car. You're leading the trucks right into it. You're gonna get us killed.
Dwight led the convoy straight into the smoke. When Daryl sees they've been duped, he commands fire. Dwight symbolically took out his pistol to resist. He quietly poked his head out and saw the 4 men in the woods. Why only this many people? It's hard to tell if they will win or lose if they continue to fight like this. So Dwight decided to reveal his identity. As long as he killed all the people here, no one will know that he is a traitor. The team didn't expect their leader to open fire on them. Just when Dwight thought everyone was dead, the woman came out with a gun and pointed it at him. Dwight tried to fight back and the woman shot him. Now the woman knows that the traitor the saviors have been looking for is Dwight. She realized why the truck wasn't used to block them and why they were led into the smoke. The woman wanted to kill the traitor, but the sound of gunshots rang out in the distance, so she had to run for her life. This time, the pursuing saviors were all killed except for the escaping woman. Dwight shouted into the woods.
It's over!
Daryl and Tara cautiously approached, their guns trained on Dwight. They still hate Dwight in their hearts because of Denise. Dwight understood their hostility. In a weakened voice, Dwight explained that he had ensured their escape through the barricade and led them into their ambush. The woman got away, and she probably went to alert the others. Dwight knew he couldn't return to the saviors. After listening, Daryl finally put down his gun. With the smooth operation just now, it was evident to everyone that Dwight played a significant role. Daryl then asked how the saviors escaped. Was it because of what he did? Dwight shook his head and replied that Eugene had helped them to escape. Rosita, who knew the truth, felt a heavy heart. She hadn't expected to be outsmarted by their old friend, Eugene. With their task completed, they planned to return to the community and regroup with the others. Meanwhile, at Alexandria's safe zone, Negan had crashed through the gates and led his men inside. Though one group managed to escape, not everyone would be so fortunate. Negan ordered his men to search and destroy every house, leaving only Rick's house. He intended to wait for Rick's return there. Negan instructed his men not to shoot Carl if they encountered him, but to bring him back unharmed. At this moment, Carl continued to throw smoke grenades inside the community, but his body was starting to deteriorate, and he felt like he could collapse at any moment. At this point, 2 of the saviors spotted Carl. Carl immediately threw a smoke bomb to cover himself. The 2 men didn't dare to shoot. After all, this is what the boss had told them to do. By the time they rushed over, Carl had already disappeared. What they didn't know was that Carl was hiding under their feet. 20 minutes later, Daryl and the others returned to the community and reached the entrance of the sewer as previously arranged. They wasted no time and entered one by one. Only Michonne was gazing at the community, now engulfed in flames and echoing with gunfire. Her concern was for Carl. She had no idea how he was faring. As Michonne stood there, lost in thought, Rosita gently called out to her, urging her to come down. Without a word, Michonne sealed the sewer entrance shut. She was determined to find Carl. Meanwhile, Rick had finally made his way back to the community. Seeing the billowing smoke and chaos, his heart raced with anxiety. He had no idea about the well-being of his family. Rick cautiously entered his home, quietly calling out for Carl and Michonne.
Shit isn't funny anymore.
Don't make me do this now, Rick. I got plans for you. Cut you up in little bitty pieces, feed you to death, and make you watch.
Then when you're some sort of screwed up, creepy stump with a head, that's when I'm gonna kill you in front of everybody.
You ever shut the hell up?
Nope. You know your kid volunteered to die. What kind of boy you raised, Rick? I'm gonna fix him. 'Cause I like him. A few years, he's gonna be one of my top guys. When I am done with you, nobody will ever try to do what you did. Not ever again. Not your friends, not your son.
Rick was knocked out of the window by this, and he took this opportunity to escape as well. Negan rose to his feet, his face bloodied from the fight. Rick was the only one who could make Negan suffer. Michonne continued to roam the community, consumed by worry for Carl. Suddenly, a man hugged Michonne from behind and taunted, "It's their fault everyone here is dead." Michonne was seething with rage as she quickly disposed of the man. Michonne was a little out of her mind at this point, and was frantically venting her emotions. Rick, also nursing injuries from his encounter with Negan, stumbled outside, only to witness Michonne's frenzied state. It was only when he saw Rick that Michonne's excitement eased. Michonne leads Rick to the sewers, where almost everyone in the community is, and there aren't too many casualties. Judith was in there too. Rick was relieved and headed in. Slowly, Rick sensed that the atmosphere was a bit oppressive. The expressions were off. Everyone seemed to avoid eye contact with him, and a sense of grief hung in the air, making his way into the depths. Rick first saw Siddiq, which inexplicably felt a little familiar. Siddiq, too, appeared nervous under Rick's scrutiny. Just as Rick puzzled over Siddiq's presence, a voice sounded, and Rick's tension eased. But when Rick turned around and saw Carl's condition, his heart trembled and his mind went blank. Michonne also looked over in pain and at the same time was a bit puzzled. They came to Carl's face. Carl looked like he was in a terrible state. Carl turned to look at his father, and instead of crying like the other children, he just lifted up his shirt in a calm manner. Michonne, upon seeing Carl's wounds, collapsed to the ground. How could this happen? Rick suddenly felt like he couldn't breathe, like there was a huge weight on his chest. Rick suddenly didn't know what to do. The first 2 times Carl had been seriously injured, he had been able to carry him around and beg for treatment, but this time, the convoy was traveling along the nighttime highway when suddenly a large tree blocked their path. Maggie had a sinking feeling that something was amiss. There was no response on the walkie-talkies. They looked back and the car behind them was under control. Then, a car pulled up ahead of them. The door of the car opened, and the scene inside made Maggie's heart sink. To their shock, the saviors had escaped and captured Jerry. A bald man dragged Jerry out of the car, while 2 other men carried a coffin. Maggie sensed that their situation was dire. The 2 men placed the coffin onto their vehicle, and then a figure emerged from the car. It was Simon, one of Negan's most trusted lieutenants. Simon continued, "You're well aware of recent events and our rules. Now, I demand you surrender your weapons. If you don't comply, I won't hesitate to send this chubby fellow on a journey. And as for the rest of you, whoever moves, dies." Though reluctant, Maggie had no choice but to obey. The most important thing now was to survive. In a matter of minutes, each car's weapons were handed over. Maggie couldn't help but ask, "How did you escape?" Simon, with a smug grin, didn't directly answer the question. He threatened, revealing that the saviors were currently attacking the kingdom. Alexandria's safe zone, too, was likely to be annihilated after this night. As for you, the hilltop, it's full of peasants, so you're in luck. You're going to be our ration base. As long as you keep producing food, you'll live. Furthermore, Simon revealed that it was their old friend Eugene who had facilitated their escape. Eugene is a genius, so now you have two choices. 1. I kill the fat man on his knees, drag you out of the car and put you in this coffin, and then I kill you in front of everyone at the hilltop. Or the second option is to turn around and go home and grow your own food for the saviors. Of course, you know our rules. One of you must be killed, and then we'll be good friends. As soon as Simon finished speaking, the bald man was about to make his move.
Nah, Gary. I got this.
I just really needed you to know what I was talking about. I need you to smell it. Now tell me, I don't gotta kill this gent with the lustrous mane. Tell me I don't gotta go down the line. Tell me, Maggie! Gary! No!
You don't need to do any of it. I just want to ask you a favor.
What is that?
I'd like that box. Take Neil home to bury him in.
It was a request Simon would not refuse. Half an hour later, Maggie led the convoy back to the hilltop. On the way, Maggie's face was blue and her anger was pushed down. As the convoy halted, Maggie stormed out and made her way inside. The people left behind looked at her with confusion, not understanding what had transpired. Then Maggie came to the cell door. When Gregory saw Maggie returning, he immediately approached her and started babbling incessantly. However, Maggie was in no mood to listen to him. Jesus comes along too. He doesn't know what Maggie wants.
This one tried to kill you.
Kate wants to put on a show, let her put on a show.
You want to be next?
No, I don't.
Saviors killed one of our own tonight on the road. We aren't even, but that was a start.
Maggie.
Get more guards on duty. Start fortifying the walls and bury Neil. First light, everybody else starts tending crops.
I thought we don't give up.
No, we don't. Simon said the others are under attack, which means there's no more supplies going in, but there might be people. We have to be ready.
Maggie is unlikely to give up the resistance. She would rather die in a blaze of glory than live a life of servitude. In a secluded spot, tears welled up in Maggie's eyes. In a place where nobody was around, tears welled up in Maggie's eyes as she experienced, for the first time, the emotions Rick must have felt. Watching trusted companions perish, she felt the helplessness of a leader who couldn't do anything. Making decisions was truly difficult. A single mistake could lead to the death of everyone. After a while, Maggie adjusted her emotions. She asked her men to put the man into a coffin. Then she wrote a line on it. "We have 38 hostages. Don't do anything rash." At the kingdom, its residents were gathered together as the saviors had also arrived. Gavin stood on a car and addressed them, expressing his reluctance for things to escalate. He reminded them that they could have led peaceful lives, but now their future looked bleak. From now on, all inhabitants of the kingdom belong to Negan, and everything produced belongs to the saviors. Additionally, able-bodied men and women would be sent to Salvation Hall to repair the buildings damaged by them. Gavin had his men search the area, but they couldn't find Ezekiel, the man Negan had named for execution. Gavin wants someone to come forward and tell him where Ezekiel is, or he's going to play by the Savior's rules. Gavin is also very angry when he sees no reaction from the crowd, and he's very reluctant to take things that far. Unbeknownst to them, Ezekiel was watching from a corner. He couldn't stand idly by for the sake of his people. Pouring gasoline on the ground, he ignited an explosion that drew everyone's attention. Gavin quickly dispatched a few men to check it out. Just then a bus pulls up and it's Ezekiel. He's coming to save his people. The bus cuts off the saviors and the residents run for cover. The people are running so fast they've already left the gates of the kingdom. Carol, who had come here to report the news, saw the scene, but she didn't see Ezekiel. Carol had to stop the last woman, who told Carol that the king was inside and hadn't come out yet. Carol didn't press the issue any further. but simply told the woman she could take the residents to the cottage where she had stayed before. Ezekiel eventually made his way to the gate. He had no intention of escaping. Death might be the best fate now. Gavin arrives with his man. His face hardened. The workforce has been let go by this guy. Gavin punched Ezekiel directly in the face and then said to him. He acknowledged that their previous cooperation had been pleasant and expressed regret over what happened to the child. He conveyed that he didn't desire such outcomes. Gavin warned Ezekiel that his current actions would lead to the deaths of many people. He told Ezekiel that sometimes one must learn to swallow their pride and comply to survive. Gavin wasn't a bad guy, but he had to play by the Savior's rules to survive. Then Gavin had his men load up and head back to Salvation Hall. Meanwhile, outside the walls, Morgan finally arrived at the location and overheard the conversation inside. Once the people inside moved away, Morgan quietly scaled the wall and entered. To his surprise, Morgan caught sight of a small figure darting through the shadows. Morgan was in a hurry. It was Benjamin's brother Henry. Morgan tried to follow him, but in a flash, the boy was gone. Suddenly, he heard a noise behind him. It was Carol. She had also come to rescue Ezekiel. They quickly exchanged information with each other. Morgan informed Carol about what he had seen with Henry, and she was shocked and deeply concerned. They had to act swiftly. If they couldn't avoid killing, their only option was to eliminate all the saviors. Quietly advancing, they reached the site of the explosion. 2 saviors were trying to put out the fire while another 2 were searching the building for fire extinguishers. Now this road is the way to go. They can only find a way to kill these people, taking advantage of the other 2 returning to the building. Along with the sound of fire, Morgan approached the man silently. Both men were taken out before they could even scream. Morgan's character had indeed undergone a significant transformation compared to before. Carol gave Morgan a deep look and moved on. Carol and Morgan hid on either side of the stairs, as there were 2 other people looking for the fire extinguisher. Soon, footsteps could be heard approaching. Morgan was really excited by the previous incident. He would not show any mercy to the saviors. He and Carol proceeded towards the courtyard. As they reached the corner, they intended to enter through a doorway. However, they overheard voices inside. Curious, Morgan discreetly peeked and saw 3 people scavenging for supplies. Despite Carol's advice to ignore them, Morgan couldn't resist. He's going to kill these bastards. Meanwhile, Gavin had finished gathering items and was preparing to leave. However, some of his subordinates had yet to return. Gavin tried using the radio to contact them, but received no response. Gavin had a vague feeling that something was going on. Immediately after, Gavin called out to several of his other subordinates, but received no response. He realized that something had definitely gone wrong. Suddenly, gunfire erupted from a nearby house. Gavin cursed. He told his men to take Ezekiel and retreat to the house. Outside will only be broken by each one of them. Once inside, Gavin commanded his subordinates to block all exits. He believed that the attackers wouldn't be numerous. Just then there's a huge explosion at the door. Everyone panicked. They didn't see anyone, but they shot at the door. After 2 minutes, Gavin signaled them to cease fire. Not wanting to waste ammunition, everyone was still staring nervously at the door, but they didn't realize that 2 figures appeared behind them. Ezekiel quickly dropped to the ground as well. Taking advantage of the chaos, Carol and Morgan launched a surprise attack, swiftly eliminating several of the saviors. Gavin was also shot, and his pistol fell under the table. The men pin Morgan to the ground and punch him hard. Morgan can't do anything but hold the man's neck. Morgan noticed the man's wound, and reached in and yanked out the man's internal organs. The scene was extremely bloody. Gavin looked at the scene, directly sucked in a breath of cold air. What is this monster? Covered in blood, Morgan stood up nonchalantly, as if the violent act had been insignificant. Gavin ran towards the outside in fear. Morgan's figure was like a villain that cast a horrible shadow in Gavin's mind. At the moment, Gavin was sitting behind the container, trembling, not daring to make a sound. As Morgan approached, the sound of his staff scraping the ground created an eerie tune. Gavin saw the dark shadows approaching as if he were the weak one, and he could only pray that he wouldn't be discovered. However, immediately after, Morgan simply stared at Gavin with cold indifference in his eyes. Just as Morgan is about to make a move, Ezekiel stops him. Ezekiel didn't want Morgan to continue killing. Ending Gavin's life wouldn't solve anything. Ezekiel knew what Morgan was like when he first came to the kingdom, the man who talked about peace every day. Morgan was in a very bad state, and Carol was advising him at this point. Morgan's heart is actually very torn. The end of the world has driven him crazy. Insisting on the way of peace, He did not see the world peace and beauty, but the people around him died one by one, so Morgan still wants to do it. But before Morgan can do it, Gavin is stabbed through the throat by a stick behind him. This person is Henry, who just ran in. Ezekiel was in disbelief. Carol also didn't want to see children going through such experiences. Morgan also wonders internally if he was right or wrong to go on a massacre spree of the saviors, which in the eyes of a child is the way to resolve hatred. Ezekiel doesn't blame the kid, because he knows that Henry knows that his brother died at the hands of the saviors, so he's lurking around to get revenge. In the Alexandria safe zone sewer, Carl was nearing his final moments. This was Carl's first injury. A bullet struck him in the abdomen. Rick went crazy, holding Carl in his arms, looking for a doctor. Luckily, Carl managed to survive. To console his son, Rick gave him his police hat. Carl is very happy because in his heart, his dad is the most amazing person in the world. The hat symbolized honor to him.
Love you, Dad. I love you.
Slowly they went through countless difficulties. Carl also grew up. The hat a constant reminder to be a strong man like his father. And now, as Carl faced impending death, he didn't cry, complain, or express anger. He said his goodbyes to his loved ones like a true man. Looking at his sister across from him, Carl gently said, "Will you be good, Judith? Listen to them, for Dad, for Michonne." With those words, Carl took out the hat.
This was Dad's before it was mine. Now it's yours. I don't know, just having it, and it always kept Dad with me. It made me feel as strong as him. It helped me. Maybe it'll help you too.
Though Judith didn't understand, she felt a sense of sadness, as if Carl was leaving her.
Before Mom died, she told me that I was gonna beat this world. I didn't. But you will. I know you will.
These people, you saved them all. It's all you, man.
Daryl prepared to lead the remaining survivors to the hilltop. Meanwhile, Rick and Michonne stayed behind to accompany their son on his final journey. After everyone had gone, the strong Carl shed a tear. After a while, Rick decided not to let his son spend his last moments in the sewer. They emerged to find Alexandria's safe zone in ruins. Rick didn't know where to go. He just wanted to find a better place. As they walked, Carl's condition worsened and he begged his father to put him down. They found their way to a nearby church, also destroyed, but Carl's time was running out.
Thanks for getting me here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't want you out there.
No, for getting me here. For making it so I could be who I wound up.
In the end, Carl advises Rick to shake hands with Negan if he can, otherwise more people will die if this goes on. Initially, they had an adversarial relationship with the governor, and Rick took in their inhabitants. Carl wanted his father to have hope for the future. In Carl's vision, Rick had a full beard and lived happily with Michonne. Judith has grown up and is very lively around everyone, listening to the songs he used to listen to. Alexandria's safe zone had been restored to its former glory. Crops were planted, new buildings were built, and everything was beautiful. The ending Carl envisioned was the one he hoped for his father. Listening to Carl, Rick made the promise.
I'm gonna make it real.
Rick then felt guilty and said he was sorry, Carl. I didn't protect you. It's a father's duty to protect his son. Carl shook his head, saying a father's responsibility was love. He was proud to have Rick as his father. Carl put his hand on the gun at his waist. Rick noticed and understood his son's intention. As Michonne was about to intervene, Carl spoke first. He knew they would wait until he passed away to shoot, but he also understood how cruel that would be. He could still pull the trigger, for he had become a man.
I love you. I love you too. I love you, Dad.
I love you so much.
Time passed, and dawn broke. Rick and Michonne sat outside, respecting Carl's decision. The gunshot felt like it pierced their hearts, making breathing difficult. This time Rick didn't go crazy because Carl said goodbye to him in the most manly way possible. It's a good thing Rick had Michonne and Judith by his side. Otherwise he might have lost his motivation to live. It's just that the only person in the world who was related to Rick was gone. An hour later Carl was buried in the Alexandria's Safe Zone cemetery. Rick wiped away a tear, hanging Carl's favorite gun on the tombstone. They were about to set out again. It's not over yet. Before leaving, Rick found a walkie-talkie from the Saviors. It could be used to gather intelligence. The car starts up and they leave the Alexandria Safe Zone. Maybe one day they'll come back and rebuild their home here. On the way, Rick, though sad, was puzzled by Carl's last words. Did his son want them to stop resisting the Saviors? Did he mean they should surrender to Negan? Michonne shared the curiosity. She suggested pulling over to read the letter Carl had left behind. However, Rick declined. He wanted to wait until everything was over before reading it. Michonne is surprised to find a letter inside addressed to Negan. Rick doesn't want to worry about that right now. He's going to take Michonne to find the scavengers again, since they went to Salvation Hall with Rick earlier. Although the scavengers escaped without making a move, they must have been seen by the Saviors, and Negan would have taken revenge on them. Rick believed it was a good opportunity to recruit the scavengers. Rick's hunch was correct. That morning, Negan waited in a meeting room for his lieutenants to report back. Upon seeing Simon return, Negan heaps praise on Carl, who by himself played them for fools and even managed to stir up real emotions within him. Simon also told Negan that the Hilltop had cooperated and had gone back to planting their crops. Only Gavin has not been heard from since he left for the kingdom. Negan was unaware that Gavin and his team wouldn't be returning. Negan instructed Simon to go to the junkyard and deal with the scavengers. Simon eagerly suggested wiping out the traitors, but Negan, in a serious tone, tells Simon that although those treacherous double dealers are despicable, it cannot be denied that they are valuable resources. So you have to control your anger. All you have to do is remind them to pay tribute to the Saviors. As per the old rules, a warning should be issued to deter others, allowing Simon to kill only one person. After Negan finishes speaking, he encourages Simon to speak his mind, as he can sense the lingering resentment in him since he arrived. As the second in command of the Saviors, Simon is currently dissatisfied with Negan. If it were up to Simon's temperament, he would have killed all these people and not let the problem persist. It would be better to go further afield and enslave a new community. Negan smiled. He told Simon more than once, the Savior's mission is to save humanity, not to engage in slaughter and plunder. People are indeed the most valuable resource. Negan believed that eliminating Rick would restore order. Simon could only nod helplessly, but in his heart he was disdainful of these concepts. At this time there was a knock on the door. 3 of his men walking carrying a coffin they found by the side of the road, apparently sent by the Hilltop. Negan looked at the message on the coffin. He frowned. It seems that these people still can't learn from their mistakes. The coffin opened and inside was a zombie. Negan used a nail gun to finish it off. Simon's lips twitched, forced to comply with the order. Though a heart full of hatred remained buried within him, Simon then leaves in a huff and takes his men down to the rubbish dump. Upon seeing them, the scavengers immediately raised their guns in nervous anticipation. Simon gestured for them to calm down, assuring that they were all friends. Jadis remained cautious, her fear of the Saviors evident. These individuals lacked mercy. Simon's tone turned light as he said, "Since we're all friends, I'll be direct. We need an explanation and an apology from you." He accused them of striking a new deal with Rick and of brazenly approaching the Savior's doorstep hand in hand. "Don't think we didn't notice," Simon remarked with a smile. Jotties calmly responded, explaining that they hadn't traded with Rick. They had captured him and were in the process of delivering him when they were attacked, so they had to leave. At this point, the atmosphere grew tense. Simon wanted to order the execution of these traitors, but he remembered Negan's instructions and refrained from acting on his own. He adjusted his approach and continued, "The past is in the past. You had a stroke of luck today. Just pay us a weekly tribute, and Negan will show mercy and spare you all punishments. It was a lucky day, wasn't it?" Simon then demanded that the scavengers surrender all their weapons as a sign of loyalty. Jotties, typical of her nature, reluctantly agreed, displaying submission in the face of strength. Her followers begrudgingly handed over their guns, which they had originally obtained from Rick. After handing over the guns, Simon was very interested in the dump and asked a lot of questions. However, Jotties always remained aloof. Simon was furious. He'd already been reprimanded by Negan in the boardroom, and now these women weren't taking him seriously.
You have guns. We have deal?
I want to know if you know. I've gotten some transgressional acknowledgement. The guns, feeling, is the remorse.
There is remorse.
No! Light it up now!
Rick and Michonne had just arrived at the junkyard when a horde of zombies closed in behind them. Rick cursed under his breath. Trying to escape is too late. Can only desperately kill a road. Rick and Michonne killed zombies while moving towards the inside. They couldn't be held back by the zombies or they would only die. But ahead, a dozen more zombies approached them. Rick was perplexed by the situation. How had the scavengers been wiped out? In a dire moment, Michonne escaped by leading Rick up a rubbish heap. Behind them, a woman in a white dress observed them. It was Jotties, the sole survivor. Jotties approached them and greeted them. She explained that the Saviors had attacked, her voice quivering with tears. Rick didn't want to listen to Jotties crying here and said directly, "This is all your fault. Your team became like this because of you." He took a car door, bending its steel to make an improvised shield. Michonne wonders what Rick is doing. Rick explains that Jotties is useless to them and that they need to make a path with the shield. Hearing this, Jotties stood up and found a chair to hold in her hands. Jotties asks Rick to get her out of here. Just get her away from the zombies. Rick, however, refused her plea, stating that she had to face the consequences of her actions. Using their makeshift shields, Rick led the way, cutting through the zombies. Michonne guarded their rear, and together, they reached the entrance. At this moment, Jotties also rushes forward.
Wait! Please, just let me get out!
Maybe this is karma. The scavengers' betrayal and treacherous actions almost led to the death of everyone in the Alexandria safe zone. Jotties had no way to escape but to return inside. After a while, Jotties sat on a stool and hit the ground with a stick. The zombies followed the sound and came towards her. Jotties doesn't want to kill herself, but there's a meat grinder here. Jotties flipped the switch and the zombies just fell in one by one and became a pile of mincemeat. Jotties was in a trance. Looking at the familiar faces, she couldn't help but reflect on whether she had really caused them to die. Maybe if she had worked with Alexandria's safe zone to kill Negan the first time, this wouldn't have happened. Shortly after, scenes of the massacre resurfaced in Jotties' mind. She couldn't let this go. She wanted revenge. Meanwhile, Rick's car had pulled over to the side of the road. He hadn't killed Jotties. Remembering his son's words, Rick then took up the letter Carl had left behind. He needed some time to gather his thoughts. Rick goes outside alone and looks at his son's letter, but hesitates to open it. He then switched to the second letter, the one addressed to Negan. Curiosity piqued. Rick skimmed its contents. Understanding Carl's intentions, Rick stood in contemplation for a long while, ultimately deciding to share the letter's contents with Negan.
Get me Negan.
Inside the Savior's base, Simon had just come back from the junkyard. He was a bit nervous. Negan was very concerned about human resources. He couldn't let him know that he had killed all the scavengers. Negan descended and questioned Simon about the mission's outcome. Simon gives a vague answer. Simon notices that Negan's face doesn't look good and immediately changes the subject to ask what's going on. Negan informed Simon that Gavin still hadn't returned, suggesting something might have gone wrong. With that, they went to the cargo box. which was full of supplies from the dump. Negan doesn't even look at it and asks Simon for details of his trip to find the scavengers. Simon said, calmly, that it was just a normal door-to-door warning. They've only killed one person. The scavengers have shown that they have known remorse. Just as Negan was about to inquire further, another subordinate approached, reporting that Rick was requesting communication over the radio. Negan was a little surprised that this Rick guy would even think about contacting him. Right after, Negan picked up the walkie-talkie and headed towards a distant spot. Simon breathed a sigh of relief, grateful that Negan hadn't learned the truth. The consequences would have been dire.
Who the hell is asking?
That's Rick Grimes.
Ricky, look at you calling me up. You want to tell me where you are so we can do this face to face?
Carl's dead.
You wrote letters. He wrote one to you. He asked you to stop. He asked me to stop. He asked us.
But it's too late for that. Even if we wanted to deal now, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna kill you.
How did it happen?
What?
How did he die? Was it us? Was it the grenades?
Fire.
It wasn't you. Carl went out to help someone. And he got bit.
Upon hearing about Carl's death, Negan expressed genuine sorrow, saying, I'm truly sorry, I really liked that kid. I was ready to mold him, but you, as his father, caused his death. Why resist? Why make it harder? You just keep stirring the pot. How long until you realize that the reason I killed your friends was to save you? You're a failed leader and an even worse father, because you weren't there to stop him from doing something stupid. You've been saying you'll kill me, but we both know you can't. Give up. Rick. While they were having this conversation, Daryl was leading the group from Alexandria's safe zone towards the hilltop. They had been on the road for a night and were now resting and studying their route in a forest. Dwight suggested taking a route through a swamp, as Negan had previously studied the fastest way to the hilltop, which was abandoned due to its dangers. Daryl and Rosita are ready to take it on board, except for Tara, who is speechless. Tara said, You're not really listening to Dwight, are you? Why listen to him when the route is so dangerous? Tobin chimed in. Why would they trust Dwight? What if Dwight betrayed them like he betrayed Savior? Dwight replies that not only did he betray the Saviors, he killed of their men, which Daryl and Rosita both saw, but one of them escaped. So Negan will definitely kill Dwight if he catches him. Dwight wanted to help them take down Negan, and afterwards, they could kill him for Denise. Daryl and Rosita trust Dwight. Daryl and Rosita have both made mistakes by being reckless and won't let their personal feelings affect the team. So the group headed towards the swamp. After half an hour, Daryl signals them to stop because they're at the edge of the swamp. It's just like Dwight said. It's not easy to walk in, and there are even zombies in it. Daryl was preparing to clear a path, and the men behind him took out their knives and eagerly joined in. Dwight wanted to contribute but was outright refused by Daryl. Their backs had to be left to their own people. Rosita glanced at Tara and followed suit. The swamp looked calm on the surface, but there could be unknown dangers within. Everyone proceeded cautiously, aware that a misstep could lead to encountering submerged zombies. Luckily, we are all experienced in battle, so if we are careful, there should be no problem. Daryl and Siddiq had just made their way through the bushes when over a dozen zombies emerged from the water ahead of them. Knowing they had to clear the area to reach the other side, they braced themselves and moved forward. Luckily, these zombies can't move inside now. They just need to be killed one by one. Tara, who stayed in the woods, looked around and had an idea in her mind. Although Dwight is assisting them, Tara still hates him due to Denise's death. They head into the woods. Tara keeps looking back, not knowing what she's looking at. Dwight spoke to Tara, apologizing sincerely for Denise's death, acknowledging he didn't expect her forgiveness. Feeling undeserving of it, Dwight walks up and kills the zombie. However, when he turned around, he found Tara pointing a gun at him. Tara didn't accept the apology, and the only reason she didn't go to the swamp was to get her revenge. Dwight runs as fast as he can. He can't die now, at least not until Negan dies before him. After a while, Dwight was exhausted, his gunshot wound throbbing with pain. Tara caught up to Dwight, and he implored her not to kill him now. Suddenly, voices carried over. They quickly hid in the nearby underbrush, realizing it was a team from the Saviors, likely searching for them. Tara's first thought is that Dwight brought them here on purpose. She aimed her gun at Dwight, warning him not to speak. Dwight questioned with confusion whether Laura had returned or not, referring to the woman who had escaped. Tara aimed her gun towards the outside, ready to fire if they got closer. Seeing that they are about to be discovered, Dwight rushes out. Dwight wants to sacrifice himself to attract the Savior's attention, but from their conversation, they don't seem to know that he is a traitor. Confused, Dwight asks if Laura has gone back, the woman who escaped. They shake their heads regretfully and say that no one has seen Laura again. Dwight was relieved. The woman must have died out there. Tara listens to their conversation, and if Dwight betrays them, she'll be the first to shoot. But from the looks of it, Dwight was genuinely trying to help them, and he'd taken the Saviors far away from here. Tara realizes she's been reckless and is about to go back when Rosita is watching her from behind. Rosita had seen through Tara's intentions. Just as she had acted recklessly before, Rosita had followed them to ensure Tara's safety.
I told you to wait! Negan could be on his way here right now!
He isn't.
For all we know, he could be telling them everything!
He won't. He led them away. They were coming right for it.
She's right, he did. I saw it.
And he saved us.
When I find that son of a bitch, I'm gonna...
Daryl saw Judith, frightened, in Tobin's arms, prompting him to restrain his anger. Daryl instructed everyone to move forward. Another hour later, they finally arrived at the hilltop and Carol came out to greet them with a smile on her face. They were alive. However, upon noticing Daryl's grim expression and the absence of certain members in the group, Carol quickly grasped what had happened. Daryl tells them what happened to Carl. Enid couldn't take it and crouched on the ground, crying. By now everyone from the three communities were gathered here and the war with the Saviors could start any time, but they're still waiting for someone who can develop tactics and direct them.
Open the gates! It's Rick!
Zombies were crawling towards the car. The man heard a noise and looked back but couldn't make it out. It was none other than Gabriel and Dr. Harlan, who had escaped from the Saviors. Gabriel's optic nerve has been severely affected by the virus and he can only see about a meter. Gabriel urgently needed antibiotics, or else he could suffer permanent damage. They wanted to get back to the hilltop, but unfortunately, the car was out of gas. To make matters worse, they had gotten lost. At that moment, Gabriel seemed to hear a sound, like a bell ringing, but Harlan didn't hear anything. Gabriel then led Harlan in the direction of the sound. They were an odd pair, indeed. One was a priest who believed that God would provide them with direction, a doctor who believes in science. They traversed through the woods until they came upon a house. Inside, the place was covered in dust, clearly uninhabited for a long time. Harlan held his weapon as he opened the bedroom door, only to find that the house's owner had turned into a zombie. Unable to endure the torment of the apocalypse, it seemed he had chosen suicide. Harlan then cleaned up the body and advised Gabriel to lie down and rest.
Gabriel, you have to listen to me. You are fighting a serious infection, and you need to be in there.
Can you read what any of these are?
When Harlan took a look, he could hardly believe his eyes. He then examined the remaining medicine in the cabinet. Inspecting each one carefully, he came to a conclusion.
This man may have just saved your life. These are both antibiotics. I'm not saying a word.
Harlan couldn't believe it either. Was God really guiding him? After taking the antibiotics, Gabriel's fever subsided, but his vision didn't improve. Harlan speculates that if recovery is not possible in the short term, permanent damage could result, leading to blindness. Despite this, Gabriel appeared calm and accepting. Harlan couldn't help but wonder, wouldn't losing one's sight in this apocalyptic world be terrifying? Gabriel expressed his faith that God would lead him forward. Harlan shook his head in disbelief. Gabriel chuckled, saying that even though he couldn't see, he could sense the expression on Harlan's face right now. Wasn't it God who just guided them here? They found the antibiotics they needed in a safe haven. With a slight mishap, Gabriel accidentally knocked over a piggy bank on the shelf. The piggy bank shattered, revealing a bunch of car keys and a map. An unbelievably fortunate discovery. Gabriel remained composed, as if to say that he had known all along God would guide them. Using the map, they pinpointed their current location. There's a museum nearby where the car is parked. so they can only pray that it's still there. Gabriel, due to his vision impairment, was walking behind. At this moment, he faintly sensed a collision sound. Gabriel looked up towards the sound, and a sign swung above, warning of traps and danger in the yard. Gabriel's expression changed as he immediately called out to Harlan to stop, but it was a moment too late. Harlan's foot had already triggered a trap, and his screams echoed through the woods, attracting nearby zombies. Gabriel's heart raced as he hurriedly reached out to save Harlan. Along the way, he also stepped on 2 traps, but they didn't activate. The zombies were closing in, and fortunately, the traps ensnared 2 of them. Harlan pulled out his handgun and shot 1 zombie, but another lunged at him. Harlan fought to steady himself and then shot down the approaching zombie. As Harlan pushed the corpse away, the last zombie pinned him down, knocking the gun from his hand. Gabriel crawled on the ground, trying to reach them. Harlan was in a dire situation. Fortunately, Gabriel finally located the gun that had been knocked away. Gabriel aimed in the general direction, but his hand was trembling due to his impaired sight. In the end, Gabriel closed his eyes and prayed. Harlan breathed a sigh of relief. Having narrowly escaped a close call, he praised Gabriel's marksmanship. His voice choked with emotion. Gabriel grinned, probably attributing his success to divine assistance. After taking a brief rest, they managed to find the car. Truly, it seemed like God was watching over them. However, as they got into the car, the saviors unexpectedly appeared behind them. The gunshot must have drawn their attention. In this post-apocalyptic world, doctors were precious, so Negan had dispatched a team to find Harlan. They were captured by the saviors once again.
Believe it, and you'll see it. He's still leading the way.
I think I do see it.
Harlan met his unfortunate end. Words cannot express it. God would have pointed him in the right direction, but he didn't send him to his death. By nightfall, Gabriel was brought back to the saviors, but to Eugene's place. Presently, Eugene was responsible for manufacturing ammunition and had a team of over a dozen people under him. Seeing Gabriel's return, Eugene felt a pang of anxiety, because he let them go. Fortunately, Gabriel claimed it was Dr. Harlan who released him. Eugene sighed with relief upon hearing this explanation. Due to Gabriel's poor eyesight, he has been brought here to sort shotgun shells and engage in some manual work. Negan went to see Dwight. Dwight acted normal and Negan didn't suspect a thing. After all, he had a gunshot wound in his arm. After a brief exchange, Negan left. The next day, Negan told everyone to coat their weapons with zombie blood, so that if they hurt someone, they would be infected. Simon conveyed Negan's orders to give the Hilltop a lesson today. Don't hit them in the head. Just give some flesh wounds to some of them and turn them into zombies. The aim is not to kill them all, but to make them fearful as usual. Before leaving, Dwight prepared to ride his motorcycle, but Simon found Dwight, inviting him to ride in a car together and stating that it was Negan's demand. Dwight had no choice but to agree. With that, the Savior's convoy set off. Negan was driving alone in a car, with his beloved Lucille in the passenger seat. Meanwhile, at the Hilltop, following Rick's arrival yesterday, everyone seemed to have found their backbone and had renewed confidence for the impending war. Early in the morning, Rick set out in a car to patrol the area since the Saviors could strike at any time. Maggie had arranged sentry posts every 800 meters, and Rick was heading to the farthest one. Maggie and Rosita stood atop the wall, understanding that Rick needed some time alone due to Carl's death. Maggie seemed to notice something through her binoculars. There was a box there with distinctive markings. Maggie was puzzled. It hadn't been there yesterday. They drive out and pull the box back. Inside, Rosita found a note that read, "If you fill this box with food and records, I am willing to give you the key to the future." The back of the note also provided the coordinates of a meeting place. This left them puzzled, as it clearly wasn't the Saviors' doing. The group known for their brute force wouldn't likely set traps like this. Michonne suggested checking it out. Perhaps someone genuinely wanted to help them. Maggie doesn't want to take the risk. She feels that if someone wants to help them and they miss it, they will just miss it. But if someone harms them, the cost would outweigh the benefits. But Michonne wanted to try, because the Hilltop wasn't doing so well, and there wasn't even enough food. What if it actually has some help for them here? Rosita and Enid said they would go with Michonne. Maggie saw that they were determined to go, so she didn't stop them. Meanwhile, the Saviors were on the move. Simon invited Dwight to ride in the car with him because he wanted to win him over. This is because Negan had previously taken Dwight's wife, and Simon didn't believe that Dwight didn't harbor any resentment towards Negan, so Simon is going to convince Dwight to kill Negan together. Dwight remains silent. At the same time, Rick was stationed on the roof of a car, keeping watch. Their plan was to honk the horn if they spotted the saviors approaching. Suddenly, Rick noticed a vehicle in the distance and used his binoculars to confirm that it was indeed the saviors' convoy. They had arrived. Rick was about to sound the horn as planned, but he hesitated. Rick looks through his binoculars again and sees Negan driving a car by himself. This was a golden opportunity. Deviating from the plan to sound the horn, Rick got into his car and sped in the direction of the saviors' convoy. At that moment, the saviors were maneuvering through a small town. Simon was driving when he caught a glimpse of a car accelerating from a nearby alley. Negan's car was right behind Simon's when suddenly Rick burst out from the alley, crashing his car into Negan's. Negan was taken aback and quickly turned in another direction to escape. Unaware of his assailant, Negan hurriedly fled. Unsure of what had just attacked him, the two cars continued their chase on the road. Negan's followers halted their vehicles. Having been driving ahead and unaware of the situation, only Simon caught sight of the events through the rearview mirror. Instead of pursuing, he positioned the truck to block the road. The rest of Negan's men are just about to go out and look for him when Simon walks out and stops them. Then he talks about how the attacker was only one person and Negan can handle it. To be cautious, he and Dwight decided to check it out. The woman offers to come along, but Simon stops her. Simon continued, suggesting that this might be a ploy to divide their forces, and they couldn't afford to let the enemy succeed. So he stopped the lorry there to make sure no one came to sneak up on them. Simon then told Gary to block off the other side. Once that was done, Simon and Dwight headed in that direction on foot to check it out. Meanwhile, Negan's car had been rammed sideways. Negan was still in a state of confusion. The impact just now made him dizzy. Rick took out his AK and started shooting. Negan felt that death was very close to him. He instantly came to his senses, quickly crawling out of the car. Negan peered out, realizing it was Rick who had attacked. The surrounding zombies were attracted by the sound of gunshots and came this way. Negan rushed into a nearby building, where a sign at the entrance warned, "Do not enter." Rick's focus was solely on Negan. Rick almost got hit by Negan's baseball bat when he entered the house, but Rick's reaction was fast enough. Rick pulled out a pistol and continued firing. They failed to notice the warning on the wall, "Entering the basement equals certain death," but they're too busy running and chasing to see that. Negan dashed into a stairwell, revealing a gaping hole in the floor and out of bullets. Negan, seeing this, stopped running.
Rick, you are out of bullet. Come on up.
Negan dodges the killing blow, but almost falls, except as Lucille falls into the hole below. Rick takes his time and takes down his axe, then looks down at Negan with indifference. Rick chopped down the axe. It was unclear whether Negan survived the blow. Rick chases him down to the basement, whistling the Savior's tune.
You still alive?
Negan continued his search in the dark for Lucille.
I'm a goddamn cat.
What Lucille means to Negan remains a mystery. At this moment, Rick continues to mock and says, "Where are your subordinates? By all accounts, they should have arrived by now. They're probably not coming." Rick illuminated the door. It said beware of flesh eaters, which meant it was full of zombies. Negan is still looking for his dear Lucille. He proposed a one-time deal to Rick, a tribute to Rick's formidable son, a gesture of genuine respect. Negan suggested that if Rick could bring the people of the hilltop, the kingdom, and Alexandria's safe zone to submit, things could return to normal. He'd even forgive Rick, requiring only a 25% tribute. "Listen, this is an unprecedented agreement. After all the trouble you've been giving me." Rick also retorted that you did that to the scavengers, so why should I believe your offer?
After what you did to Jadis's people. Scavengers. You killed them. The hell are you talking about? A whole community just wiped out. Is that how you save people? Even though plenty of your people must have seen you go, see?
Son of a bitch.
Still just me and you. See, it's times like this you realize who your true friends are.
Looking at the things on the ground, Rick chuckled. The baseball bat that Negan cared so much about was found by Rick. Rick wasn't entirely wrong. Negan's henchman Simon was walking leisurely with Dwight, showing no intention of rescuing anyone. Along the way, Simon was persuading Dwight to assist him in becoming the leader of the Saviors. Eventually, they arrived at the crash site. Negan's car had flipped over, and the situation looked grim. They proceeded to the driver's seat but found no trace of Negan. Simon told Dwight that Negan might have escaped, but that didn't mean he was alive. He might be half dead somewhere. They could continue searching, but once they found him, they might still have to follow Negan's orders. Alternatively, they could turn back, taking the remaining people to the hilltop. They take over the Saviors. It'll be a historic moment. After speaking, Simon awaited Dwight's response. Dwight lit a cigarette, pondered for a moment, then flicked the cigarette, setting the car on fire. This gesture signified Dwight's agreement to Simon's invitation. He would do his best to help Simon become the leader. Simon nodded his head in satisfaction, then started back the way he came. Meanwhile, in the basement, Rick is still confronting Negan, lacking light. They couldn't see each other. Rick once again taunted Negan, saying his approach would never last. Negan claims to save the world, but it's just empty words that don't actually save anyone, because you don't have anyone you care about. You just use people to feed you and get you some wives to sleep with. The only thing he cared about was that baseball bat. Yet now, he couldn't even save it. Rick offered Negan a chance to trade and allowed him to say goodbye to the bat.
Don't you touch her! Come and get her.
Rick quickly got up, picked up the bat again, and struck Negan once more.
Get your hands off her.
Goddamn psychopath. You're gonna kill us both.
As long as it's you first.
Negan, this guy is really willing to die for a baseball bat. When Rick went after him, Negan had disappeared without a trace, once again letting the guy get away. Meanwhile, back with Simon's group, they had rejoined the team.
Where's Negan?
You couldn't find him?
Gone.
Just blood.
What are we supposed to do now? Now what?
Who are you?
I am Negan!
Damn right you are! Don't matter if the big man ain't here. We're still Negan. We all are!
Simon's strategy of twisting the truth was impressive. He directly told the others that they were all Negan, so they should proceed with Negan's plan and teach the hilltop a lesson. This time, they would wipe out all the people at the hilltop. On a highway, a car was speeding along. Negan slowly woke up. He had just escaped from the house when he was ambushed.
Shut up.
A man honks the car horn, and the distant woman responds in the same manner. If the horn sounds, it means the Saviors are on their way. Everyone immediately becomes tense, preparing for the upcoming war. The battle has been meticulously planned, and now everyone takes their positions. As the sky darkens, silence falls over the hilltop. This is the eve before the storm. All await the arrival of the enemy. Soon, those on the wall spot movement in the distance. The Saviors have arrived. Several vehicles are approaching this way. Jerry waves towards them from inside. Maggie is the commander for tonight's operation.
Here we go.
Outside the hilltop, a procession of vehicles arrives at the gate. Negan was nowhere to be seen. Simon felt the air was sweet. He could do whatever he wanted tonight. Maggie intends to communicate with Negan through the radio, but it's Simon who answers. They exchange harsh words. Maggie tells Simon directly, "We have 38 hostages in our hands. If you don't withdraw, you'll be collecting bodies. Leave, and I might spare their lives." After speaking, Maggie hands the radio to the hostage Alden behind her. Alden also cooperated.
It's too nice a night to spend it dying slow, don't you think, Simon?
Simon doesn't hesitate. Simon didn't even hesitate to say to Maggie, "It's a shame, woman, that the Saviors you've captured are a wreck. They got themselves into trouble and we only reward those who don't get caught, and the ones who can solve their own problems. Threatening me with this trash? I have only one thing to say to that: go to hell." Maggie falls silent after hearing this. The captives are not as valuable as she thought. Simon was also annoyed that this woman dared to threaten him, so he orders his men not to bother with intimidation anymore. Now, their task is to eliminate everyone inside. Dwight, as the infiltrator, tries to stop Simon, but Negan isn't there and Simon won't even listen to him. At this moment, a motorcycle approaches them. It's Daryl returning, and the hilltop opens its gates for him. The Saviors see an excellent opportunity and follow the car into the compound. Little do they know it's part of Rick's strategy. A school bus blocks them at the gate. Upon Maggie's command, Figures rise from behind obstacles all around them. They open fire madly towards the gate. The saviors were caught off guard just as they entered. Maggie watches the battlefield. Everything going according to plan. Simon is pinned down by gunfire, hiding in his car, unable to move. He can only use the radio to command his people outside to shoot arrows inside. Indeed, as the arrows fly, the hilltop is immediately under pressure. Several are hit on the spot. Maggie has no choice but to order the hostages inside, not letting them die in vain out here. Maggie observed for a while but still didn't spot Negan's presence. Tobin maneuvered behind the gate and ambushed the saviors, hitting 2 archers. When Tobin peeked out again, a man stabbed him in the abdomen, incapacitating him instantly. The man intended to finish Tobin off, but Carol's gunshot from a distance saved him. Carol hurried over to check on Tobin's condition. Siddiq arrived as well, instructing Carol to join the fight while he took charge here. Siddiq is a trainee surgeon. Simon is also hiding behind the wooden board at this moment. From where he has a clear view of the woman who is shooting, he prepared to launch a surprise attack. Dwight realized the woman was Tara before he could come up with a plan to stop it. Simon charged out. Simon approached Tara silently, with Dwight close behind. Tara was engrossed in the battle and completely unaware. Daryl noticed the 2 suspicious figures and, turning his head, understood their intent. Simon is about to swing an axe at Tara, but Dwight beats him to it. Tara was hit and fell to the ground. Simon, seeing his objective fulfilled, quickly fled. Tara wasn't dead, just wounded in the shoulder. At this point, the lights in the building shattered, signaling Maggie's plan's second phase could commence. Explosive devices were hurled into the saviors' midst, while others swiftly smashed the headlights of their vehicles. Everyone from the hilltop hid, and silence replaced the sound of gunfire in the courtyard. After a while, Simon cautiously poked his head out, instructing his men to survey the surroundings. The saviors were bewildered as darkness enveloped the hilltop. They couldn't see anything or hear a sound. Simon didn't suspect a trap. He believed the hilltop couldn't fight back and had fled. Inside the building, only a few elderly, weak, and sick individuals remained, trembling in fear, proudly commanding his men to move around and pursue. Simon planned to enter the building and slaughter a few people out of frustration. Simon then moved inside with his men, whistling out of habit. Simon was thinking that the people inside were probably scared to death when they heard the whistle. Suddenly, the headlights turned on, and a hail of bullets answered Simon. Surviving saviors dashed to the right, seeking refuge behind a truck, but their reaction was within Rick's plan. The lights came on here, too. Rick brought his men out for a sweep. The saviors were disoriented and overwhelmed. Only a handful survived and fled in their vehicles. Maggie's face was marked with frustration. She wanted to exterminate these survivors. And that damn Negan, he didn't even show up. Early the next morning, the hilltop began to clean up the mess and everyone was busy. Tara, who had just tended to her injuries, also assisted. In response to Dwight's ambush, Daryl cursed. Some people never change, always up to no good. In reality, neither of them had realized that Dwight's arrows lacked force, inadvertently serving as a subtle warning to Tara. Despite their victory, Maggie remained troubled, her brow furrowed. The backyard was now filled with more graves, sacrifices made last night. A portion of the group was injured and being treated inside the house. Most of the injuries resulted from arrows or other cold weapons. By evening, people from the 3 major communities had gathered in the building. Due to the large numbers, many were forced to sleep on the floor. The seriously injured stayed in beds in the infirmary and in their rooms. Around 3 o'clock in the early morning, a man woke up in the medical room. His responsibility was to tend to his injured companions. The man in the bed seemed to be in bad shape. His forehead was hot. He had a fever. He quickly got up to find a doctor, unaware that Tobin had also risen from his bed. An hour later, a woman on duty heard commotion from the medical room and went to the door to investigate. She felt liquid under her feet and looked down to see that it was blood, and it was all over the house. And then, soon after, the zombies in the medical room began moving towards the building. The people sleeping inside the building didn't even notice. 3 zombies entered the room. Even the man who had sustained minor injuries on the second-floor corridor had risen. Now a zombie too. Meanwhile, outside the building, the captives were sleeping. Young Henry approached the cell door. He knew that the saviors were locked up inside and wanted to find the killer of his brother. If he couldn't find the culprit, Henry was determined to kill everyone here. Gregory tried to manipulate Henry with sweet talk, attempting to trick him into opening the cell door. Alden, awakened by the commotion, overheard the conversation between Henry and Gregory. All Alden could do was tell Henry that it wouldn't make you feel any better. Meanwhile, agonizing screams echoed from within the building. They realized something was terribly wrong. Maggie walks out of the house and looks outside in disbelief. It's a mess. Zombies were rampaging through the lobby. Due to the lack of light, many hadn't yet comprehended what was happening and were bitten by the zombies. The woman was still struggling at this point, and was about to be bitten by a zombie. Luckily, Daryl came in time to save her. Ezekiel arrives but too late. The man's arm has been bitten by the zombie. Siddiq rushed forward, using a belt to quickly tie off the man's arm. Rick, who came next to him, also knew what to do. He had done it more than once. He lifted his axe and struck down. There was a scream. Jesus and Michonne are also working together to kill the mutated zombies, and then quickly evacuate those who are still alive. When he saw someone running out of the building, Jared gloated a little instead.
Music to my ears.
Was it you?
Jared was startled and certainly wouldn't admit to killing Benjamin. This boy would undoubtedly shoot without hesitation. Henry, unable to find the culprit, impulsively opened the cell door. Henry entered with a gun, intending to question them. However, a woman behind them suddenly turned into a zombie and attacked those around her. Henry became flustered. Seizing the confusion, Jared tackled Henry to the ground and wrested the rifle away from him. A portion of the captives followed Jared, fleeing the scene. Half an hour later, Rick and his group managed to eliminate all the zombies in the lobby. They suspected that the zombies had infiltrated unnoticed, but Daryl was surprised that they were all his own people. The three of them were puzzled. In another room, a woman was awakened by the commotion and opened her eyes to see Tobin transformed into a zombie. The woman struggled against him, but Carol arrived just in time to assist. Looking at this man, Carol is very sad, and now can only take care of it personally. Rick and the others quickly arrived upon hearing the commotion. Seeing everyone safe, they breathed a sigh of relief. However, they were baffled by how Tobin, who was never bitten by a zombie, had still turned. Tonight's events are too strange. Rick suddenly recalled something. While fighting Negan the previous day, he noticed that Negan's baseball bat was covered in zombie blood. Could it be that the Saviors had smeared zombie blood on their weapons and blades? They were all a little surprised at how the Saviors could be so vicious. It was an attempt to instill fear in them from within. The man on the bed suddenly said, "If that's the case, then it all makes sense." He had also been shot by an arrow and was now running a fever, which he believed to be an early sign of turning into a zombie. He felt disheartened, realizing he didn't have much time left. This is a longtime member of the Alexandria safe zone who's been through a lot together, and he's asked Rick to give him one last ride. Rick's head hung low. This was the last thing he wanted to see. In another room, Rosita and a few others were protecting the elderly and weak. Rick and Daryl entered, assuring them that the house was safe now. Tara wanted to inquire about the cause, but she noticed the odd atmosphere as Rick and Daryl stared at her. After a brief hesitation, Daryl revealed that zombie blood had been smeared on the weapons. Tara was taken aback, realizing she had been hit by Dwight's arrow. After a few seconds, Tara managed to accept the news. In the post-apocalyptic world, this kind of scenario has probably been fantasized many times. No one can guarantee that they will always survive. In the yard, Siddiq noticed that some captives had escaped and a few had turned into zombies. He actively moved forward to eliminate them. Just after killing one zombie, there was another taller zombie behind him, which made Siddiq a bit overwhelmed. Fortunately, Alden arrived with a hoe and helped Siddiq. Maggie and Jesus also arrived at the scene. Alden quickly explained that they were assisting. A child had opened the cell door. Some captives had fled, while others chose to stay and were now trying to close the gate. Maggie looked towards the gate and indeed saw several captive saviors resisting the zombies. She immediately instructed those around her to help, then turned to Alden and questioned why he didn't escape. Alden sincerely replied, "You've seen it yourself." To Negan and Simon, "They're worthless, though they might not mean much to you either. The ones who stayed are genuinely sincere." Maggie fell silent. This act was enough to earn her acceptance of them. Early the next morning, all the fallen were buried, and a somber color hung over every face. Despite the apparent victory in the preceding battle, the cost had been devastatingly high. Rick's own mood was heavy, his thoughts a mystery as he turned and left the scene. Soon after, Rick changed his clothes, grabbed his rifle, and headed straight for Alden's location. Rick intended to inquire about the possible whereabouts of the captives. Alden analyzed the chances of them going back to the Saviors as low. He'd heard them planning an escape before. Some injured and lacking supplies, they would likely have sought refuge in the old tavern down the hill. With the information obtained, Rick departed, but Alden called out to him. Alden knew what Rick was up to, so he pleaded. He knew it was too much to ask. He pleads with Rick to please not kill all of these captives if he finds them, and admits that some of them are just misguided and not inherently malicious. Rick nodded in agreement, signaling his willingness to grant Alden's favor. Meanwhile, Carol and Ezekiel realize that Henry is missing and they've searched the hilltop. Enid approached and informed them that Henry had opened the cell door the previous night, leading to the escape of some of the saviors. Henry himself was also nowhere to be found. Carol realizes that Henry must have followed the saviors out for revenge. On Tara's side, she didn't feel any abnormalities and had consulted a doctor who confirmed that she didn't exhibit any symptoms of fever. Tara realizes that it must have been Dwight who shot her with an arrow without zombie blood and missed on purpose. As noon approached, Morgan armed himself, preparing to venture outside. His purpose mirrored Rick's, to locate the escaped captives. Seeing Morgan's departure, Carol rushed over, assuming he was off to find Henry. However, Morgan candidly revealed that Henry had persistently asked about the identity of his brother's killer. Fearing that Henry's heart would be consumed by hatred, they had concealed the truth from him. If he'd killed that fucking Jared before, Henry wouldn't have to think about it. With these words, Morgan left without delay. Concerned for Morgan's state, Carol armed herself and joined him, also hoping to find the missing boy. Maggie and Rosita convened a meeting to strategize for the next onslaught from the saviors. Their ammunition was scarce after the previous battle. Daryl, however, remained optimistic, pointing out that the saviors' escape from the Walker horde, coupled with their battle losses, had likely depleted their ammunition stores too. Rosita suddenly shrieks out, reminding everyone that they forgot about Eugene. Eugene can make bullets, so their stockpile will be constant. Fortunately, Rosita knew the location of the bullet-making machine. Meanwhile, Morgan and Carol, relying on tracks, scoured the area. Morgan caught sight of a small figure vanishing ahead. Was that not Henry? Urgently, Morgan shouted and gave chase. Carol was behind him, but she didn't see anything. When Morgan came up, Morgan also understands that he has killed too many people this period of time and will start to appear the state of insanity. He always imagined some characters and imagined the worst.
You know what it is.
You're not here. He's not here.
You were supposed to.
You are not here! He's dead. You know he is.
I came out here to keep an eye on you. I didn't come out here to look for him.
Morgan knew in his heart that bad things would always happen, so he had no hope that Henry was still alive. They followed the trail to a highway, where a horde of zombies roamed. Fearlessly, Morgan aimed to cut through them. Carol notices something and tells Morgan to look that way. A zombie approached, impaled with a stick. Was it not Henry's? Carol's eyes were filled with tears, and she had a bad guess in her heart. Yet, Morgan coldly turned away, resuming his march. Deep down, he wished for the boy's safety, but he had grown disillusioned. The world held little hope. Yet, Carol, after a moment of contemplation, halted Morgan's departure. She wanted to convince him to search for Henry. This zombie is coming from the other direction. What if Henry is still alive? Morgan cut her off, stating that she knew the truth of what they'd find. Nevertheless, Carol, her voice quivering, implored Morgan to try, unwilling to let go without confirmation. Because of her cowardice, she did not find her daughter, and if she kept looking for a different result...
You can try to.
No. No, I can't. I watch him die. You save people. I have to.
When I tried to run, you found me. You knew I could come back. You saved me. And you can too.
I'm not strong like you. That wasn't me. I was there that whole time watching him, knowing that something would happen. I was waiting for it to happen, and then it did. Like it. I have to kill him. So I just have to. Like it always does. I have to.
Morgan's conflict is one that few people can understand, but his state is heartbreaking. Then they parted to do what they wanted to do now. The man continued walking through the forest when suddenly he seemed to catch sight of something. The man ran quickly and hid behind a tree. not daring to make a sound. A horde of zombies passed by just a couple of meters ahead of the man. Just as Rick was surveying his surroundings, he noticed another person coming up behind him. This person was no other than Morgan, who had acted separately from Carol. Rick felt a sense of unease, as he sensed that Morgan's state of mind was off. Rick called out Morgan's name and said, "It's me! You know me!" Upon hearing Rick's voice, Morgan gradually eased up.
I'm not right.
It turned out that Morgan wasn't unfamiliar with Rick. He had mistaken him for a hallucination. Rick was relieved to see Morgan speak up. It would have been a real shame to be killed by his best friend. This time, the two of them have a rare tacit understanding. Their thoughts were simple. They couldn't allow those people to return to the Saviors and betray them, as it would lead to many deaths.
You're out here for them. Me too. We finish it. You and me.
They moved through the forest and reached the small town that Alden had mentioned. There was a broken arm and leg on the road, proof that one of the group of captives had been bitten. It was likely that the captives were hiding nearby. Just as Rick was about to speak, everything went black before him. When Rick woke up again, he saw none other than the captives, and the man lying on the ground with his arms and legs cut off. They hadn't noticed the waking Rick and Morgan and were just discussing whether or not to leave the wounded behind. Some believed that these few were a burden, preventing them from returning to the Saviors. Others questioned the point of going back, as they had been abandoned long ago. However, Jared wanted to take Rick back, considering it a major achievement. He believed that Negan would reward them handsomely for it. Jared grabbed the stool next to him and was ready to give them a last ride. Rick spoke up and stopped Jared, stating that their vehicle was nearby, and they could take them to the hilltop for treatment. He also mentioned that those who wanted to stay at the hilltop were welcome to join them. He emphasized that they had made a wrong choice, but it was not too late to change. If they released them and cooperated, they would be given a chance to become part of the hilltop community. They could live together and be a part of their group. Furthermore, Rick urged them to make a quick decision as a horde of zombies was approaching. The majority of the people present were swayed by his words. They still remember what Simon said when he abandoned them, but Jared doesn't believe a word of it, nor does he believe in a zombie horde, and urges the others not to be fooled by Rick's promises. When Jared sees that his mate is still hesitating, he aims his gun at Morgan, but the others stop him. Killing Rick and Morgan would make joining the hilltop impossible. At that moment, zombies indeed began to approach from outside. Their numbers overwhelming, chaos ensued. As the group was unprepared for such an onslaught, the guy with the broken arm and leg was the first to be eaten. Rick urgently shouted to untie them and return their weapons. He and Morgan could help them escape. However, Jared threatened them with his gun, insisting that no one should untie them. Jared is ready to kill Rick and Morgan first. Luckily, an injured man bumps off Jared, but the man becomes zombie food. The other man quickly untied Rick and Morgan. If he had been any slower, they would have been dead too. Morgan reclaimed his staff, while Rick retrieved a rifle and began to eliminate the approaching zombies. These guys have decided to follow Rick back to the hilltop and join them for good. However, Rick and Morgan exchanged a glance, resolute in adhering to their prior agreement. Killing these people, their expressions didn't fluctuate the slightest bit. Morgan looked at the other side of the house and saw that Jared, the man he wanted to kill the most, had escaped, so he followed him. When Morgan got to the corner, there was only one room. This is where Jared disappeared. Morgan took the stick and carefully probed inside. Jared must be hiding somewhere. However, at that moment, Morgan was once again plagued by a hallucination, seeing the image of the boy Henry. While he was lost in thought, Jared attacked Morgan from behind and picked up his stick, ready to stab him through. But Morgan grabbed the stick. Morgan swiftly managed to kick Jared out of the room. Jared looks up and sees the zombies are behind him. He tries to run back into the house again and Morgan slams the door shut. Realizing that waiting there meant certain death, Jared attempted to leave. However, Morgan firmly grabbed hold of him, refusing to let him go. In the end, Jared was eaten alive by the zombies. Half an hour later, after Rick had eliminated all the zombies and threats, they both understood that showing mercy to enemies was often cruelty to oneself. Meanwhile, within the clean and orderly confines of Jodi's room at the garbage dump, she had changed into clean clothing, appearing much more presentable. However, the memory of the scavengers being massacred weighed heavily on her. After a while, Jodi's began to gather her belongings, some clothes and 2 handguns, a clear sign that she was planning to leave. With everything packed, Jodi's picked up a baseball bat, wiping away a tear from her eye. Then she opens another container and Negan is trapped inside.
No, really, just tell me, what the shit?
A few minutes later, Jadis was sitting on her suitcase, glancing at her watch from time to time, as if waiting for something. Jadis had set up a pyre here and Negan was bound on the ground. Although he was immobilized, he couldn't stop talking, repeatedly explaining that people were resources, and that he would never have ordered the massacre. He blamed Simon for taking matters into his own hands. Negan's words weren't an attempt at submission, but rather a genuine regret for the events. He even pleaded for Jadis to forgive his mistakes. Growing annoyed by Negan's words, Jadis swung the baseball bat down, but she stopped just short of striking him. Negan was visibly taken aback by the sudden turn of events, but Jadis doesn't seem to want to let Negan die so easily, and instead throws the baseball bat into the firewood and turns to leave. Negan sees that no one is here to watch him, so he tries to break the ropes, but it doesn't seem to work. Negan can only control the movement of the flatbed truck. After a while, Jadis returned pushing a zombie in front of her. Negan, that guy, opened Jadis' suitcase and took out a handgun and a flare. Negan doesn't want to hurt Jadis because she's already pathetic. Inside the suitcase, Negan found some photographs, likely Jadis' most precious possessions. Negan tried to reason with Jadis, urging her to come out and talk, threatening to burn the photographs if she didn't. Reluctantly, Jadis emerged, pleading with Negan not to destroy the photos. Negan could feel Jadis' pain because he was the same person. Negan then talked about his past. It turns out that Negan had a hard time holding onto his life when the apocalypse hit. It was his wife, Lucille, who had constantly encouraged and supported him through the toughest times. Then his wife died and he relied on this baseball bat to get him to where he is today and named it Lucille in honor of his wife. That's why Negan cares so much about the bat. It was as if his wife was beside him. So Negan understands how important photos are to Jadis. Suddenly, the sound of a helicopter echoed through the sky. Jadis grew tense, and without hesitation, she pushed the zombie toward Negan. Jadis counted the shots Negan fired from the gun. When the gun ran out of bullets, she lunged at Negan and tried to take the flare out of his hand. As the flame extinguished, meanwhile, the helicopter was already over them. Jadis hurriedly ran back to her room to retrieve another flare. Negan was shocked that there were still helicopters after all this time in the post-apocalyptic world. It seems that Jadis is connected to them in some way. The helicopter hovered for a moment before retracing its path and leaving. Jadis returned with another flare, but it was too late. The helicopter was already gone. Jadis collapsed to her knees in despair. It was revealed that the scavengers had maintained contact with these mysterious people. Jadis was going to leave with them today, and then that bastard Negan ruined it. Jadis contemplated burning the baseball bat, wanting Negan to experience the feeling of loss. Negan nervously kept pleading with Jadis and he stated that he didn't burn Jadis' photos. Despite his threats, he claimed he wouldn't actually go through with it. "I know what this means to you," he admitted. At that moment, Negan's demeanor was far from that of the tyrant of the region. He appeared as an injured man. Jadis softened, letting go of the flare in her hand, and then she bent down, crying in anguish. Finally, Jadis released Negan. At the end of the day, they are all poor people in this post-apocalyptic world, living on a little bit of hope. Negan had intended to inquire about the helicopter, but seeing that Jadis had no intention of revealing anything, he refrained from pressing further. Subsequently, Negan left the place, promising to visit her often. He extended an invitation for Jadis to join him with the Saviors if she ever wanted. At night, Negan found a car. Throughout the journey, his brows were furrowed, lost in thought. Suddenly, his expression shifted to one of surprise as he spotted someone by the roadside. You can guess who Negan met.
If shit could shit, it still wouldn't look as shitty as you.
Negan drove back to the Savior's base. When he saw someone coming, the duty officer came up to check on him.
But you're not gonna say a word, you understand?
I knew you were alive. Negan. I knew it.
Hell yes I am. Daddy's home and it's gonna be a surprise.
Meanwhile, Carol continued her search for Henry in the woods. She discovered Henry's arm guard and then heard his distant cries for help. Without hesitation, she sprinted in the direction of his voice. Henry was hiding behind a tree trunk, with 3 zombies closing in on him. Carol arrived just in time, rushing to his aid. This scene may seem familiar, reminiscent of Carol's daughter, Sophia, hiding by the riverbank in the past. Finding Henry helped Carol to somewhat heal her past regrets and the cowardice she once felt. 2 hours later, the sight of Carol returning with Henry brought joy to those within the walls. Ezekiel also looked over in surprise. Henry was running towards him excitedly. The trip out had made Henry miss the king immensely. Afterward, the group rested on the grass, their attention fixated on the entrance. Relief washed over them as Rick and Morgan returned, covered in blood, particularly Morgan, who gazed at Henry in disbelief. Was this another illusion? Then Morgan pulled Henry's collar open and there was no blood on it. It wasn't an illusion, Henry was truly alive. Morgan said shakily that he killed them and avenged Henry's brother. As he spoke, Morgan choked up and couldn't speak for a moment. Rick walked towards the building to change his dirty clothes. A lot of people wondered what they were doing out there. Alden looked at the blood on their bodies and saw what was going on. Meanwhile, Morgan found a secluded spot to sit. His heart was heavy, burdened by a persistent sense of guilt. The death of his son had become his deepest wound, a source of immense pain. Morgan himself is also a lonely person, no relatives in the world, although there are friends, but no real understanding of his confidant. Against the backdrop of the night, Morgan's figure appeared hauntingly desolate. In another location, a pile of bullet casings was delivered to a certain alley. This was Eugene's bullet-making site. Daryl wanted to blow up the machine, but Rosita didn't think it was necessary. Just take out Eugene. Dad, please forgive me. When I was helping others, I got bitten by a zombie. I don't know if I can hold on until you come back, but I don't regret doing this. Rick finally opened the letter left by Carl, inside describing the beautiful moments they had as a family before the apocalypse and mentioning the events that unfolded in the post-apocalyptic world. As Rick read the letter, tears welled up in his eyes. In the end, Carl also mentioned wanting his father and Negan to cease hostilities, though he also wanted Negan dead. He believed that continuing the war would only lead to more innocent lives lost. He believed that if everyone could coexist peacefully, the world could become a better place. Rick understood his son's perspective, but he knew that a truce was impossible. For true peace, Negan had to die. Inside the Savior's base, Gregory, the man who had betrayed them before, approached Simon, hoping to find refuge there, and Gregory offered to meet Negan to apologize for the lack of information. However, Simon bluntly told Gregory that Negan's era was over, and he was now in control of the Saviors. Gregory was taken aback at first but then revealed his true nature, attempting to flatter Simon while belittling Negan. Simon saw through Gregory's act and even contemplated killing him. Gregory's previous provision of false information had put Simon in an embarrassing position. Now, if he were to shelter Gregory, how would his subordinates perceive him? Simon decided that he would kill Gregory once he had full control over the Saviors. Now Gregory can't even fart. None of them knew that Negan had returned alive, including Dwight, who was outside smoking. Suddenly, a familiar whistle echoed.
Shouldn't be. Surprised to see him, right?
Dwight turned to see Negan approaching. Negan's straightforward question caught Dwight off guard. Dwight stammered as he explained that they had found the car, and Simon had assumed Negan was dead. Negan interrupted Dwight, motioning for him to help push the car. Dwight, apprehensive, did what he was told. Negan went on to describe how Rick had cornered him in an underground room full of zombies and decay. He expressed his disappointment that they hadn't come looking for him. Feeling hurt by their actions, Dwight tried to shift the blame onto Simon, mentioning that Simon was second in command and they had followed his orders. He knew exactly who he was and he'd always be Negan. Negan nodded in satisfaction, then turned and walked away. Dwight felt a sense of being exposed as Negan left. After a while, Negan called a meeting. Simon is shocked and rushes to explain that they saw the crash and thought they had killed you. I know I was wrong, boss. I let personal feelings cloud my judgment, which led me to change the orders from infecting to exterminating at the hilltop. And it went sideways, resulting in heavy losses. I own up to all my mistakes and I'm just hoping you can forgive me. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right this time. Negan chuckled and then stood up. As he walked, Negan reminisced about Simon's past. How despite his recklessness and impulsiveness, he had been loyal and hardworking, which earned him the position of Negan's second-in-command. However, Negan couldn't tolerate Simon's scheming to replace him behind his back. He demanded Simon kneel and face the consequences. Simon understood the principle of the winner is the king, the loser is the enemy. He immediately dropped to his knees and waited for the baseball bat to hit his head.
Gonna make a move? Or is that it?
No move to make.
All is forgiven. Get your ass up. We're good.
As Negan's second-in-command, Negan is willing to give Simon another chance. If Simon had refused to kneel, Negan would have acted without hesitation. Simon stood up and made a commitment. Upon hearing Simon's declaration, Negan decided to put this matter to rest. Next, Negan had one of his subordinates bring out a map with markings. Then Negan said solemnly that he would lead a team of 10 men to set up the first supply depot at the place where the markings were drawn. They would bring along the bullets and explosives made by Eugene and use them as a foundation for their operations. And then we'll do the same thing with the rest of the circled areas. By the following night, they would have completely encircled the hilltop. Any person attempting to leave the hilltop would be killed, with the aim of wiping them out entirely. With his strategic deployment in place, Negan concluded the meeting. Dwight hurriedly returned to his room and pulled out a map, marking the locations from Negan's plan. He wrote on the map that tomorrow afternoon Negan and 10 of his men would be at the places marked with a cross. The places marked by circles will each have a team of 10 men. You seize the initiative and set up an ambush, killing Negan and eliminating the remaining individuals, bringing a complete end to all of this. Just then, a knock sounded from outside. Dwight swiftly concealed the map, knowing that discovery would mean certain death. He forced himself to appear composed as he opened the door. Finding Simon standing there, Simon had been reprimanded by Negan and forced to kneel, while Simon seemed to outwardly accept it. His mind was still focused on how to overthrow Negan. Simon had come to try and recruit Dwight once again. He had already convinced several like-minded individuals, planning to kill Negan directly. As long as Negan is dead, he'll be in charge here. Upon hearing Simon's proposal, Dwight didn't immediately agree. He displayed a thoughtful expression, indicating that he was considering the offer. Simon didn't rush Dwight either. Negan had once taken Dwight's wife, a wound that no man could easily forget or forgive. But back then, survival had demanded compromise. After contemplating for a while, Dwight agreed. Simon was very excited. This is what a man is like. Simon informed Dwight that they would gather in the courtyard in the afternoon. Once Simon left, Dwight's expression turned peculiar. In the afternoon, Dwight was already waiting in the courtyard. Gary came out with a group of people, and it looked like they were all persuaded by Simon. Simon arrived with his own group. These guys were more than enough to kill Negan by surprise. Simon turned to the assembled group and spoke. By being here, you've committed to the plan. There's no turning back now. They were to act swiftly, quietly, and with respect. After all, Negan had led them to accomplish the seemingly impossible. Then Simon pointed at Dwight and continued, "You, Dwight, have a personal vendetta against Negan. If you want, Negan can let you be the one to end it. They'll be covering Dwight." Suddenly a familiar whistling sound comes and a flash of panic crosses Simon's face. Negan strolled out, resting his hand on Dwight's shoulder. Thanking him, Negan's gaze remained fixed on Simon, who dared not meet his eyes. On the count of 1,
3, 2, 1.
Gunshots rang out, killing all the rebels except Dwight and Gregory. Then a group of people came out from the surrounding area. They looked like they had already ambushed this place. Even if Simon was not smart, he knew that Dwight had betrayed him. Simon angrily tries to rush up and kill Dwight, but is held back by the rest of his men. Simon stared at Dwight, his voice laden with frustration as he asked why. Negan had done so much to you, played with your wife, scarred your face. Dwight's reply was succinct: he would win. Then Negan tells Simon that you can be the boss. Beat me and you'll get what you want. If you can manage that, you'll be the Savior's leader from now on. Hearing this, Simon's eyes erupted with a bright divine light. He hadn't been afraid of anyone compared to his fists. The showdown took place in the grand hall on the ground floor. Negan gathered all the saviors and workers to witness it. They all had enough confidence to kill each other, especially Simon. He even made a declaration before the fight. Of course, the purpose was to sneak attack. One punch, two punches. It was only after enduring Simon's third punch that Negan began to counter. Grasping Simon's head, Negan delivered a powerful elbow strike. The surrounding people were filled with fear and trepidation, realizing that this was a real and intense showdown. However, with no orders from Negan, no one dared to intervene and spoil the duel between the two. Amid the crowd's focus on the duel, Dwight swiftly guided Gregory to a side passage. "You need to get out of here," Dwight said urgently. "No matter who wins, it won't end well for you. Take this information to Rick. I've left a car for you at the back. Go!" Now, Gregory had a chance to get away, so naturally, he ran. Meanwhile, Dwight nonchalantly returned to the scene, as if nothing had happened. Ultimately, Simon met his end at Negan's hands. In a fair fight, Negan won. He's always been invincible in people's minds. Afterward, Negan personally escorted Dwight back to his room and informed him that Simon had died. Negan congratulated Dwight on his promotion as his most trusted right-hand man, stating that he was now the second in command. Dwight feigned happiness, expressing his commitment to assisting Negan with Rick's matters. However, Negan hinted that Dwight had already helped him more than he realized. Perplexed, Dwight didn't fully grasp the meaning behind Negan's words, but he chose not to dwell on it. As Dwight opened his room, he was taken aback to find the woman had returned. In reality, Negan had been aware of Dwight's treachery since the previous night. It explained why Rick knew when to attack, how to assault their strongholds. Rick's operations had progressed so smoothly, Negan hadn't immediately dealt with Dwight, instead orchestrating a false tactical plan. Even Gregory escaped to deliver intel, and Negan knew about it. Rick's small patrol team was likely to face total annihilation due to the false information this time. Negan didn't intend to kill Dwight. Death was too easy for a two-faced traitor like him. On the hilltop side, Gregory had delivered the information. Rick had seen Dwight's message, yet he was torn. Could he trust that man? This man is a coward in the post-apocalyptic world, but is valued for his ability to make bullets. He was just about to go out with his bodyguards. It was Daryl and Rosita who ambushed him. As long as they capture him, the Saviors won't have enough ammunition to wage war. They're taking Eugene back to the hilltop. Throughout the journey, Daryl and Rosita maintained mostly silent, while Eugene incessantly vented his frustrations. He explained that he had manufactured bullets for the Saviors out of necessity for survival. Rosita couldn't stand it any longer and retorted, "I know who you are. You're the one who helped the Saviors escape the zombie encirclement before. Everything that happened afterwards, all the lives lost, it's on you." Eugene, however, wasn't willing to accept the blame. Instead, he shifted the responsibility to Rick for leading the resistance that led to the current situation. Rosita's patience snapped. She pointed her gun at Eugene's head and sternly rebuked, "You are unbelievably selfish and a traitor. You've betrayed your only friend in this world, especially Abraham, who protected you. Putting a bullet through your head right now would make the world a better place. The reason we don't kill you is not because we still care about you. It's just that we need the knowledge in your head. Your future involves being locked away in a dark cave. The only chance you'll have to see the sunlight is when we need you to teach us something. So don't worry, we won't kill you. All you want is to stay alive. And you will, but we'll force you to make yourself useful with your pitiful existence." Eugene was left deep in thought, a mix of contemplation and anger on his face. Soon, they reached the spot where the vehicles were parked. However, a few scattered zombies had appeared. Daryl told them to stay put while he took care of them. Seeing Daryl leave, Eugene spotted two zombies approaching from behind through the car window, so he thought of an idea. "Attention all those who are eating." Eugene shoved his fingers into his mouth and forcefully induced a gag reflex, causing vomit to splatter onto Rosita. Rosita was immediately repulsed, her disgust reaching its peak. She was determined to end this jerk. Rosita was blocked by two zombies coming over to her. As Rosita dealt with the zombies, Eugene had already slipped away through a hole. Daryl and Rosita pushed through the wooden door, finding only a pile of ashes. The remnants of a series of footprints were visible on top of the ashes. Daryl shouted for Rosita to follow in this direction. Tracking was Daryl's specialty. They decided to shoot Eugene as soon as they saw him. They couldn't let him go back to making bullets. Unbeknownst to them, Eugene had deliberately left those footprints to lead them in that direction. He was concealed within the ashes. Half an hour later, Eugene returned to the factory, looking disheveled. Negan's other right hand, Regina, had been waiting for him. Seeing Eugene's return, she breathed a sigh of relief. Eugene was Negan's favorite. Regina informed Eugene that Negan had returned safely. Negan was planning to annihilate the hilltop and had set a trap for Rick and his group. Therefore, Eugene had to provide a substantial amount of bullets to Negan by tomorrow noon. Eugene appeared visibly enraged now, seemingly thoroughly provoked by Daryl and Rosita. Turning to Regina, Eugene said, "Please convey my congratulations to Negan on his return. Assure him that I will provide the bullets and explosives he needs as requested tomorrow." Regina secured the promise and hurried back to Salvation Hall to report to Negan. Eugene then addressed the workers, urging them to produce as many bullets as possible. Exceeding Negan's expectations, they were to aid the saviors in wiping out the hilltop with a surplus of ammunition, and then Eugene rushed into production. At Salvation Hall, Simon, now a zombie, was tethered to the fence, serving as a guard dog. Negan leaned against the railing, contemplating tomorrow's actions. Negan's walkie-talkie rings, and it's Michonne's voice. Michonne had decided to pass on Carl's letter to Negan after careful consideration. She instructed Negan to stay quiet and began reading the letter aloud. When Carl wrote this letter, the saviors were still surrounded by zombies. So, in the letter, Carl said, "Perhaps you found a way to get out of your predicament by now. When the time comes, there will undoubtedly be a fierce battle between you and my dad, resulting in many deaths. I just want to know if this is what you truly want. Even if you defeat us, you'll still encounter enemies similar to us. Cooperation is the only way out. I've also left a message for my dad, hoping he can talk to you and seek peace. If he comes to you for a conversation, would you be willing to agree?" After hearing the letter, Negan was deeply moved, but he still believed that there was no turning back from the path they had taken.
All this, there is no getting out of it now. See, winning isn't about beating you. Winning is about killing every last one of you. That is starting over. You tell him that. No more talk.
The next morning, Eugene arrived at Salvation Hall with Gabriel. The people here are already busy, because today is the day that the hilltop will be destroyed. They noticed Dwight, now reduced to a slave. The saviors showed no trace of respect for him. Eugene's purpose for coming here was to deliver the finished bullets. Additionally, he requested that Negan personally inspect the results. Negan took Eugene's pistol with a smile and fired several shots at Rick's dummy. Negan was quite satisfied with Eugene's work. The bullets were practically indistinguishable from the originals. Eugene asked to join Negan's group for the operation, wanting to witness the hilltop's downfall firsthand. He also suggested Negan adopt a formation for firing in ranks, which could end the battle in under 10 minutes. Negan couldn't refuse Eugene's loyalty. Negan promptly called a team over and handed them a map. "Go set up roadblocks at the marked locations on this map. If things go south, fall back to the rendezvous point indicated." The team quickly set off upon receiving Negan's orders. Meanwhile, at the hilltop, they received intelligence from Dwight about Negan's plan to take his group to the marked locations on the map. However, Rick remained cautious and decided to send a small team to scout first. If it's a trap, it won't be a total loss. They arrived at the marked location on the map through a narrow path. Half an hour later, they spotted a group of the saviors setting up roadblocks using zombies. Carol signaled her companions to stealthily approach from behind. The saviors don't even realize that the Grim Reaper is approaching. Rick quickly brought his men out to see what was going on. One of the saviors narrowly escaped and begged for mercy upon seeing Morgan approach. Unfortunately for him, he encountered the current Morgan. After a thorough search, Ezekiel found a map and a note on one of the men. The map depicted strategic deployments, but it differed from the one Dwight had provided them. It was evidently a trap. The map indicated that the saviors were assembling at the old mill, and Negan was likely there as well. Then Rick radioed Maggie to tell her it was a trap. Negan was currently gathering his forces at the old mill, necessitating a change of plans. They needed to arrive there before the information reached them. However, little did Rick know that this was Negan's true trap. Negan deliberately sent that team to their deaths, leaving behind a misleading map. The real danger lay on their path to the old mill. Gabriel had just learned of Negan's plan, and he was in an anxious state of mind. Taking advantage of the car's evasion of zombies, he opened the door and leaped out. Steadying himself, Gabriel headed into the woods, intending to warn Rick and his group about the trap, but due to his vision impairment, Gabriel didn't notice the approaching zombies until they were right in front of him. Just as Gabriel was struggling to hold on, the saviors arrived and dispatched the zombies. Eugene angrily aimed his gun at Gabriel, scolding him not to be foolish, as no one would be able to save him. Gabriel just sighed. Negan also caught up but didn't immediately kill Gabriel. He delivered a punch instead. Negan intended to execute Gabriel in front of the hilltop community. Rick and Maggie had already rendezvoused, leading the combined forces of the three communities towards the old mill. Meanwhile, back at the hilltop, a sentry suddenly noticed activity in the distance. The saviors' vehicles were approaching. Most of the people left here are incapable of fighting. as well as the Savior's captives who stayed voluntarily earlier. Tara rushes to organize the residents to leave through the tunnels. Rick and Maggie, members of the three main communities, made their way, but as they walked, loud whistles sounded around them. Everyone is on alert. The whistles are coming from the speakers, so there's no way to see where the enemy is.
How about you step out and face us?
Oh, I am everywhere, Rick. Some more bullhorns, more
Walkies. Pick a direction to run.
You remember your old buddy Eugene?
Well, he is the person that made today possible. Same goes for Dwighty boy here. He's got to go too. We are cleaning house today, Rick. Here we go.
3, 2.
This time, Negan aimed to completely wipe out the hilltop. Upon Negan's command, the Saviors appeared densely packed on the hilltop. What's going on? The Saviors' guns are blowing up. People using rifles were blown up. They were confused. Those using rifles were instantly killed, leaving them bewildered. The hilltop side was even more confused. They didn't understand what was going on. Quick to react, Rick seized the opportunity, understanding that regardless of the situation, it was a perfect chance to strike back. Negan, looking at his injured hand, realized immediately that Eugene had tampered with the bullets. Gabriel charged at Negan and landed a punch. Negan was essentially defeated at this point. Negan quickly retrieved a baseball bat, preparing to bludgeon Gabriel. From another direction, Dwight charged and slammed Negan against a car, relentlessly pounding him. Negan flung Dwight off and made a swift escape. Meanwhile, Maggie's group had finally reached the hilltop. With the Savior's weapons rendered useless, the battle was heavily one-sided. Inside the hilltop, Tara had managed to lead the remaining people out, guiding them through the woods to safety. The Saviors will be able to track them because of the baby's cries. Tara decided to stay behind and delay the pursuers. Alden offered to stay with Tara, which she initially suspected as a ploy to gain access to weapons. Rick hadn't allowed them to fight, nor were they allowed to carry weapons. Due to a lack of trust, Alden stated that he would stay whether he was given a weapon or not. After that, Alden asked the other Saviors if any of them wanted to stay, and most of them did. Tara was touched and said nothing more, and dropped the gun pouch on her back. Then the group waited in the woods for the Saviors to come after them. Soon, the Saviors arrived. Tara was preparing to give the order to open fire when an explosion occurred on the Saviors' side. Tara was puzzled and quickly went out to investigate. It turned out that the group of women who had been living by the seaside had also arrived. Aaron had been persuading them since his departure. Meanwhile, the other battlefield was nearing its end. Most of the Saviors were now dead or wounded, leaving only a small group surrendering helplessly. Today, there was no escape for them, and they understood that their time was up. Facing the surrendered Saviors, Maggie's group naturally refrained from killing them. Only Negan remained to be dealt with. Meanwhile, Rick was tracking Negan. Upon hearing gunshots, Negan took cover behind a tree, his gunshot wound causing excruciating pain. Negan looked back and realized Rick had run out of bullets, and they were fighting. Rick was hit in the stomach by Negan's bat. However, Negan's baseball bat was knocked out of his hand by Rick. Negan kicks Rick a few times, leaving him defenseless. Negan regained his weapon and prepared to finish Rick off. Although the Saviors had lost, Negan refused to concede defeat. Facing Rick, Negan said, "Let me tell you something. It was all bullshit in the grove. I'd already made my choice in my mind. If it wasn't for not wanting to kill a father in front of his kid, you'd have been dead long ago. Now, it seems killing you back then would have been the right choice. Carl might still be alive." Just as Negan was about to make his move, Rick kicked him to the ground.
I'll get out of it. I always do. It's just you and me, Rick.
And I got a bat. I am better. Just give me 10 seconds so I can tell you how.
No.
Carl said it doesn't have to be a fight anymore.
He was wrong.
The war came to an end. Rick had won, though not in the most honorable way, but he had won nonetheless. In that moment, Rick thought of his son and all his dead friends. the others gathered behind Rick to witness his vengeance on Negan. After much contemplation, Rick made a decision that many wouldn't understand.
Save him.
No! Maggie!
We have to.
We have to end it! Rick! It's not over till he's dead! No!
Rick addressed the crowd, all the prisoners who raised their hands. Put them down, they're going home now. Negan was alive, but his reign was over. Those who couldn't accept that would pay the price. Rick's intention was to foster consensus despite differences, eliminating class divisions and focusing on the common enemy, the distant zombies. There was no need for internal conflicts. Unity was the key to survival. A new world was about to begin, and Rick hoped everyone would strive together for a better future. What Rick did may not be understood by many, even by the audience. This thing is over. Morgan also removed his armor, which belonged to Benjamin, and asked Carol to pass it on to Henry, and then Morgan left. In the end, Rick assigned people to take over Salvation Hall, intending to transform it into something completely different from Negan's regime. A car drove into the woods, and Daryl arrived with Dwight at the outskirts. Dwight understands what this means. It's time for him to pay his debts. Dwight deeply apologized to Daryl before kneeling down. It was enough for Dwight to see Negan's throat slit. Unexpectedly, Daryl tossed the car keys to Dwight. Daryl, a man of few words, sternly warned Dwight to leave and threatened to act if he ever returned. Before leaving, Daryl urged Dwight to find Sherry, with a single purpose. From that point on, Dwight returned to his pre-apocalyptic home, where Sherry had left him a letter. As for whether Dwight ultimately found his wife, viewers could find out in Fear the Walking Dead Season 5. Meanwhile, Morgan arrived at the junkyard and informed Jotties that the saviors were done for. Rick was preparing to establish a new order, inviting anyone who wished to participate. Since the end of the season, Morgan lived here in seclusion from human strife because he didn't want to kill anymore. Fear the Walking Dead Season 4, Episode 9 elaborates on Morgan's journey afterward as he encounters another group of survivors. Negan, too, was saved from death. Rick directly told Negan that they wouldn't kill him, but his life ahead would be spent behind bars.